Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this meeting of the City of York Council Planning Committee on Thursday, the 8th of October 2020. This, of course, is being webcast, and that webcast will remain available for future reference. So welcome to those who are watching or those who might be watching this at some future date. For the benefit of those who may not be used to the way that these remote meetings are happening, let me just quickly explain that as members of this committee wish to contribute, they will be using their virtual hand. So I will see a hand raised, and we'll attempt to bring in those questions and comments in order. As we do so, it may be that another member has a supplementary question, something that's really helpful to ask at that point in time rather than later, because it relates to the subject in hand. They will indicate that by raising their virtual hand, and we'll manage the meeting in that way. When it does come to the vote, for the benefit of everyone concerned and to avoid any doubt at all, that vote will be a named vote. So I will be asking the democracy officer to conduct the vote when the time comes. You'll be able to see on screen the members of the committee, but it may also be that from time to time you'll see other faces on screen, as we do at the moment with Becky Eads from the planning office. And as others are brought on, they will be enabling their videos as they make a contribution. I would just say to the officers of the council, thank you very much for supporting this meeting and your attendance here this afternoon. It is very much appreciated. And as and when you do contribute, it would be helpful for members of the public if you just briefly introduce yourself and your role within the City of York Council. We will be joined by a number of public speakers, and we're delighted to welcome them in turn. But once that public session has finished, they will be then leaving the meeting, as it were, but able to continue watching through the live stream. I have two members of the committee who've given their apologies. That's Councillor Barker, and I'm delighted that Councillor Cuthbertson is substituting for him, and also Councillor Lomas, and again pleased that Councillor Perrott is substituting for her. So thank you very much, and welcome to everybody this afternoon. As we move on with the agenda, I would just first of all ask if there are any declarations of interest, if any members of the committee have any reason to declare something at this point. Councillor Pavlovic, and also I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Pavlovic first, then Councillor Kilbane. Councillor Pavlovic. Councillor Pavlovic appears to be having some difficulty being unmuted at the moment. I don't know if we can help at all with the technical issue.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Chair?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Just a point of order, Chair. We seem to have lost Councillor Cuthbertson again on my screen.
We do, don't we?
I don't know if you want to pause or if you want to carry on, but given that this is a relevant area on the agenda.
Of course. We'll wait just for a moment. Councillor Cuthbertson, can you hear us?
Just rejoining audio now, Chair.
Thank you. Just to be sure, Councillor Pavlovic, you had nothing to declare at that point. No. And Councillor Kilbane, were you going to say the same thing, or did you have something you were going to?
No, Chair, just for the record, so that everybody knows, I'm a ward councillor for the area for the site under discussion. It's a non-prejudicial interest. Probably doesn't need to be declaring, but I know it's been declared previously, so I just thought we'd have it on record.
Thank you. We'll hold on just for a moment, as it seems very likely that there we are. Welcome back, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Just for that, Chair, I've logged in on my Windows laptop, which I hope will be more reliable.
Okay. Can I just remind all members how important it is to remain connected to this meeting at all times, not to leave the screens. And I will be checking when we come to the vote that everybody has been present throughout the whole of the discussion. So we only have one item on our agenda this afternoon, and so we come to item 4 of the plans list, the land south of the residence Bishopthorpe Road. In your paperwork, oh, I'm sorry, of course, I have forgotten to mention that we do have minutes to approve. You already have sight of the minutes of our meeting on the 9th of July. And before we move on, can I just see that you're content with those records, and I'll sign them if so at a later date. Thank you. I see general nods and agreements, nobody indicating to the contrary. Thank you. So
I think Councillor Dillon had something. Just a second. He was waving. I just saw him wave. Sorry.
Sorry, couldn't find the right button. It was just to alert you to the fact that I think there may be a correction on page 9 in relation to the vote, because you've minuted Councillor Widdowson as taking part in the vote, and on the previous page it says that both myself and Councillor Widdowson had to leave the meeting before we got to the vote. So obviously that would need correcting if she wasn't there.
Indeed.
But obviously, as I wasn't there, I don't know whether she was or not.
Thank you for that. And assuming that can be double checked, we'll agree those minutes. Everybody happy with that? Thank you. So if we'd like to move on and introduce the item that we're considering this afternoon, please, Becky, would you do that for us?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Becky Eads, Head of Development Services, and I'm going to introduce this item for you. I'm going to share my screen now and do the presentation. Just a second. Oh, has that worked?
That's great, thank you.
It's actually on the wrong page, so you're just going to have to, you've got a preview of what's coming, just a second. Right. There we go. That's better. So,
thanks.
So it's for erection of 85 apartments in 2 blocks with 7 houses, townhouses, with associated parking, cycle storage and landscaping.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is the existing view from Bishopthorpe Road. As you can see, that's the residence and the race course there. And this is the existing view from Goddard's Gardens to the west. This is the site location plan here with the site outlined in red. As you can see, the access in from Bishopthorpe Road, if you follow where my cursor's going, through and round down here to the new development here in the apartment block in the U shapes there, the I shape and the townhouses along here. Slide 2 is a proposed location plan closer up. Again, you can see the access coming in and exactly where the car parking areas will be, the areas of landscaping. That's all within that there. These are the proposed elevations that you can see there with block 1 and 2, with the 3 floors with the recessed 4th floor in there, and again the U-shaped block there with the lowered 2nd floor, and again the 2 other blocks there and there. Again, elevational details and treatments of the proposed elevations in here. More elevations there. I'll just give you a second to have a look at those. And this slide shows the application site in respect of the residence there that you can see in the background. So residential development in here, as you can see there, and the clock tower behind, and again the residence, there's the racecourse there and the proposed development there to give you a sense of scale. This slide here was the previously approved extension to the residence. So as you can see up there, this is just for members' reference more than anything else. This is the outline parameters plan. So as you can see, Bishopthorpe Road coming down here. This is the residence here and the extension that I showed you on that other application in this area here, which was previously outlined for development. This slide again is the outline outline, master plan. Again, Bishopthorpe Road, the access into the site. Again, the residence here, and similar, again, development within the site there. This is for members' reference and ease more than anything else. This is looking into the site previously, as you can see, with the previous buildings in there that have now gone, and you can see the racecourse in the background. This is the view looking northwest within the former factory grounds, so you can see what is now the residence behind. This is what was previously there in terms of the warehouse buildings. And just to put that into context, if you look here, that's the residence, and that is the size of the warehouse building that was previously on the site there. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop sharing now. I'm going to run through the additional information now, if that's okay. So I'll run through this all and I'll hand back. So
please do.
The status, we've just re-illustrated the status of the outline planning permission just for members' reference in terms of the original 09 application and the fact that the outline permission has now lapsed and it's no longer extant. That was due to the timescales involved in that. In terms of some more additional information, that it's envisaged there will be a total of 120 car parking spaces for residents and visitors, which will be supported by sustainable transport measures. The former factory addition with warehouse attached to the south of the multi-storey factory were 9 metres and 14 metres in height retrospectively. So that's what was there previously. The proposed development building heights would be a maximum of 13.9 metres in respect of the 4-storey element of the apartment blocks to penthouse roof level, and 9.9 metres to parapet level, and 12 metres in respect of the townhouses to parapet level. The height of the 2-storey element of the apartment block will be 7.9 metres to parapet level. Then we've also gone to illustrate the building heights across the widest terrace development to the roof. The main one of these is the residence, that's 20.9 metres in height. Then we've also outlined the scope of the original outline permission. It was for a mixture of uses, but there was no quantum conditioned for any part of them. So that means that we didn't specifically say that there had to be 100 square metres of A1, or we didn't, it was there, but it wasn't specifically conditioned. In terms of housing permitted at the site, from the in terms of our most recent application, in terms of what's been built out at the site, the overall housing build out from the most recently available figures is 163 apartments have been created in the residence, 48 dwelling houses have been built by David Wilson Homes in the northern sector of the site, together with 177 apartments. It's also worth noting that the applicant has confirmed that the discussions with the developer and chosen affordable housing provider, JRHT, is at an advanced stage. We've also had a number of additional representations since the committee report was issued. Again, they're all outlined for members in the additional information. And that's it for the update from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be some questions from members at this point. If you have any questions at this point, please do indicate. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't think I was going to be first on that one. It was the view from Goddard's that was in the presentation. It wasn't clear to me, because the report seemed to suggest that it would be visible on that particular view. It wasn't clear to me from looking at that where you would be able to see the building.
I'll reshare a minute, 2 seconds. There you go. I'm not sure that, well, can you just, is it?
To me, it looks as if the building would be behind the racecourse buildings, therefore not viewable at all from Goddard's.
think you can just see the landscaping. I think potentially you could see it, but it wouldn't be significant on the landscape, I think, is what that's trying to illustrate, because of the size of these buildings here. It's just tucked around the back there.
Okay, thanks, Becky.
Okay.
Councillor Pavlovic and then Councillor Fenton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions for officers covering two separate sections. Would you like me to ask them all, or would you like me to ask some on the MPPF and then some on the local plan and the scale?
I think it would be helpful to take it one at a time.
That'd be fine.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Becky, and thank you for the presentation. Can I just refer you to page 21 and paragraphs 5.9 relating to the heritage asset element? So in paragraph 9, it states that when considering the impact of a proposed development on the significance of a designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation. And this is irrespective of whether any potential harm amounts to substantial harm, total loss, or less than substantial harm to its significance. And then it also states in paragraph 5.12 regarding the case law, whether harm to a conservation area or a listed building is outweighed by the advantages of a proposed development, the decision maker must give particular weight to the desirability of avoiding such harm. There is a strong presumption against the grant of planning permission in such cases. Sorry, I've paraphrased. However, you've the officers in their recommendation and yourselves have indicated that although there is an impact on the heritage asset, that it is less than substantial harm. Can you tell me how the thinking went in, therefore, given paragraph 5.9 and 5.12, why you've therefore still concluded that this warrants approval?
No problem. I'm just going to bring Guy Hansen in now.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Guy, can you come in, please?
Hello, Guy Hansen, City of York Council. I'm an architect and manage a team called Design, Conservation and Sustainable Development. In answer to your question, I mean, the report was written by Officer Eric Matthews, but I will give some thoughts to my assessment of the impact of harm of this application. It's a little bit complicated by a number of factors. One of them is the existing outline planning application, of which the local authority sought to approve a scheme of a certain mass and bulk, which I've assessed to be quite substantially larger than the proposal here. And I know we had some discussions about the fact that that's lapsed, but there is an issue around consistency of decision making. It's further complicated by the fact that permission was for an office use, which is considered to have some greater public benefit because it was an office rather than residential, and you could say that office generates employment, and employment is a greater public benefit than residential. But with reference to your point about harm, the greater public benefit of the office use when compared to actually what is considered a greater impact of harm of that earlier scheme, because I think that's a greater impact of harm in terms of how it, quite obliterates quite a lot of views. You would have to say that we made a decision of approval at that time, probably linked again to a further complication, which is the regeneration of the entire site. But you could then argue that the harm that was part of that decision hasn't been manifest because they haven't actually developed out this part of the site. A further complication is the designation of the conservation area in the 1970s, 1976 or something, 77, and the character area appraisal in about 2006. At that time there were existing buildings on the site. There's the sort of North Light factory extension, which originally occupied a great larger part of the site, and then a subsequent, which was not, an earlier piece, contemporary with the 5-story factory building, in fact slightly earlier. But then the later 20th century extensions, which were even taller. And the purpose of the conservation area at the time of designation is to preserve and enhance as is. So it takes the condition of preserving and enhancing what we have now. It doesn't try and preserve and enhance something that was 100 years ago, otherwise we'd be recreating medieval jousting or whatever, I don't know. But it preserves and enhanced as it is. And so since then we've had the demolitions, which have substantially changed the view, and you could say the view has improved. But then you have to also consider the fact that it was demolished with the purpose of redevelopment. It wasn't demolished for the purpose of creating a park, or it wasn't demolished as part of a planning game for something else. It was demolished for the purpose of redevelopment. So that gained view is in a sense a temporary view, and so in terms of harm to the conservation area, you probably have to say, well, what was the conservation area like at the time of designation? And similarly, in terms of the harm to the setting of the multi-storey factory, you would have to consider it in the context of that former development on the site that has now gone, and we're now afforded a much greater view. In considering what an appropriate redevelopment of that site is, you then sort of start from scratch and think, well, what sort of development footprint should be on the site? And again, in the context of the overall Terry's redevelopment, we've got a number of townhouse forms and we've got apartment forms, and the apartment forms tend to be on the periphery, tend to be closer to the more urbanized parts of its context, whereas this is on the edge of a wider landscape. So you would hope to have a sort of lower density development on this site as a result of that. So more akin to the sort of townhouse type scale of things, although you could consider that's not a sort of a given, but in terms of its setting becomes really important in that wider open context. And then there's a further complication, the fact that it's sort of screened by trees, although in winter obviously you have more penetration of the views across the site. And so I do consider that there is harm, because this building does sort of sit in front of the Terry's multi-storey factory, and the multi-storey factory, part of its significance is around the fact that it is an iconic building seen in a wider landscape. I think Historic England in the earlier outline planning application talked about the visibility of the top 2 floors of that building and how it should dominate. They were obviously particularly minded of the fact that there was stuff in the foreground beforehand, and perhaps minded of the fact that there's a tree belt in the foreground. So really, whilst the existing view is great, and you could consider the harm now has been altered by the proposal of something in the foreground, I'm sort of moderated by all those background things that I've mentioned, and so that puts me in terms of making an assessment of what's appropriate, on the verge of saying it's acceptable. Well, in fact, I have said it's acceptable.
I'll just come in here, Guy, just to, so obviously we've taken into account everything that Guy said, and obviously Guy's done a very thorough assessment. If you look on 5.28, where the case officer has specifically said about the fact that they consider it to be there would be less than substantial harm, and then we've clearly done the assessment that says the harm would clearly be outweighed by the public benefit of the development of a sustainably located, previously developed site for residential use in line with the requirements of the NPPF And then it also says with the associated additional construction employment. So there has been that balance done there by the case officer. We've taken into account everything that's Guy said there and made that balance and come to the conclusion. So it has been done, whether or not you agree with it, but that has been done by the case officer.
Chair,
You've clearly got a further question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for such a comprehensive answer, Guy. And can I just pick up on a couple of features, if I understood you correctly? That the size of the current proposed development, you indicated that from where you were having to make an assessment, it would have been preferable for townhouses to have been proposed on that site, and that would have met the criteria of protecting that designated asset. So it's not the principle of should development have taken place. It was more a question of what type of development. But yeah, you know, I appreciate that you have then concluded that the scale and massing of this development is on balance acceptable, but it would have been preferable to have been a smaller in scale. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, although I would qualify that with, you know, it's an easy thing for me to say, you know, I would like such and such, but you know, and the applicant comes to us with a certain proposal, and if we think of when we started along the road for this particular application, you know, it was a sort of November 2018 application. There was, from the beginning of 2018, there was a proposal through a pre-app process, and it's gradually got smaller and smaller. You know, the initial proposal was pretty much all 4 stories, and it was all in 2 horseshoe-shaped buildings, and it's and we made a number of recommendations to reduce its scale for all sorts of reasons. You know, one of which was its impact on the historic environment. The other was because it was generating too many cars and meant there was not insufficient landscape, insufficient open space, and it was just, you know, sort of an overdeveloped type footprint. So it has slowly come down. And you know, we would state our case of what we would be comfortable with, but then at the end of the day, we have to make a decision on what's in front of us, and it sort of got down to the point where I think my last recommendation was that, you know, I would be happy if you got rid of the 4th story, or I would be happy if you got rid of a link between the two, one of the U-shaped blocks, and in the end, the link between the U-shaped block went, so it appeared as sort of 3 perpendicular taller elements rather than you know, rather than something that blocked the, you know, the longer view. And it's worth noting that, you know, the fact that the taller bits are perpendicular means that, you know, you generally, in the longer distant views, you see through them to the factory building. So when we're talking about comparisons of height, you know, an absolute height of something that was there before that took up a greater footprint would have had even a lower height would have had a greater impact than the views of 3 perpendicular bits that have then got gaps between them, and that becomes a matter of judgment. But yes, that's where I was with it.
Thank you. And Councillor Pavlovic, I know that you had a second question, but would you mind if just holding that, because a number of other members who've got questions, and it may well be that it's picked up. I will come back to you. So
thank you, Chair.
Don't worry. But Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. The report mentions an objection raised by the Vale of York CCG, which from memory I don't recall in my time on planning seeing the CCG raise an objection to a specific planning application. So I was just wondering how frequent an occurrence that is, and also whether similar objections have been raised in relation to previous phases of the overall Terry's development, or whether we have any sense as to what sort of triggered the CCG to raise those concerns now, whether it's this element of the overall development that they feel has sort of reached a tipping point in terms of GP capacity.
Can answer part of that one, and then I'll bring Eric in. In terms of the objection, I'm not aware of many others, but then it is a fairly recent involvement that we've had with the CCG in terms of our correspondence with them. So that may be why, because that is something that we are getting more involved with them, and obviously through the local plan and through development that's coming forward in the size and scale. So yes, it is the first one that I've come across, and I'm not aware, I don't know about the rest of it, so I'm just going to bring Eric in because he's obviously dealt with this site for a number of years and he'll know if they've previously objected. But it is something that we are starting to work with them, so it is being picked up. Okay. Eric, are you there? Can you answer the bit about the other site, the other parts? Okay, doesn't seem like it. Oh, there we go.
I cannot unmute.
Okay.
Okay, go on.
I cannot unmute. I cannot
We are
hearing
hearing you.
We can hear you.
We are hearing you. Yes.
I'm having trouble. I'm getting an unstable internet connection warning.
Okay.
We have not had. We did have some involvement with them before. Members may recall there was a proposal which is now up and running for the conversion of the former headquarters building into a care home. We did have some discussions with them then, but this is the first occasion that they have raised an objection in respect of anything happening here. The sense that I'm getting is that there is an issue of cumulative impact from everything that has gone before, which has raised problems for the local GP surgeries, which need addressing.
Thank you. Okay. I'll come to Councillor Kilbane and then Councillor de Gorn.
Thank you, Jay. Took me a little bit by surprise there. Can you explain to me why we've gone from 56 dwellings on this land in the local plan to, what are we, 92?
Yep, it's in the case officer's report. I had it and now I've lost it. 2 seconds. Page 24, 5.23. No, wrong one, hang on. Yeah, 5.22. We've obviously consulted the forward plan team, and they've obviously said the quantum was 56. The figure of 56 units was arrived at as an indication of the possible development capacity of the site based on a calculation of the site area and target density for the locality in the draft local plan. It is not a definitive indicator of the maximum or minimum capacity of the site. So what they look at is a general overall view. They won't look at the site specifics, but obviously once we've looked at this application, we've assessed it in terms of the transport information and everything else. That's where we've got to in terms of that this amount of development is acceptable. It does differ, but the way the local plan done is not as in depth as potentially this would be. There's secondary from that.
Go ahead, Councillor Kilbane.
I'm sorry, but what I'm asking is how you got from the lower figure to the higher figure. I mean, I can understand the process, but you know, what are those calculations based upon? How's that done?
I don't understand what you mean. That's what they've applied for as part of the planning permission, so that's what we assess.
Councillor Ed, do you want to comment there?
Just to clarify, from my understanding, the figure that's in the local plan is what the local plan team have said is a possible site use for that particular area. As with any site on the local plan, any of those landowners can then submit an application for whatever they want. It's not for the council to preclude what numbers are. Am I correct?
Bang on. Yep.
So there's absolutely no point in the local plan. There's no point in estimating a number of dwellings that would be appropriate if it doesn't really matter because it depends upon what the applicant puts in for.
No.
It's estimating. You said it yourself. You estimate a number. It's not going to be the exact figure on every site that is in the local plan.
but you've got to have an estimation to bring your local plan forward, and that's the calculation that's used. We use that calculation to see what we think would be acceptable at the site. You can have proposals that come in differently. The gasworks, for example, came in, that was actually higher than what the local plan put forward, but we assessed it, we looked at it, and it was considered acceptable. This could be the same in this case.
But this is nearly double the number that was estimated.
I think the point has been made. But Councillor de Gorn and then Councillor Doughty.
Thank you. I have highways questions. I don't know if we have someone who particularly would answer those points.
Helen's here.
Okay. I note on paragraph 5.49 refers to a pedestrian and cycle link onto Racecourse Road to the southwest as being suggested, which can be secured by a Grampian style condition. So just wanted to check that that is in the conditions that we're putting forward. But from looking at the proposed site plan on the pack, it says something about pending level information, land ownership confirmation and council approval. So it still sounds a bit vague as to exactly where and how that's going to be provided. And the second question was in terms of parking levels and emergency access. Can I just check that my understanding is right, that this is that the access route is also the access to the parking that's already there for the residents? And I'm not sure how many parking spaces are in the, or how many vehicles potentially are already using that access, but we're planning to put another 120 vehicles accessing the site through that one single access point. That's the point I wanted to clarify.
Could you respond to that, please?
Yes, hello, my name is Ellen Berger. I'm from the Highways Development Control Department. On the pedestrian link, sorry, to the south of the site, the land adjacent is actually council land, and then it will link to adopted highway. But we didn't get the chance to get all the agreements in place before the planning application came in front of the committee. But because it is council land and would link to adopted highway, I do think that it should be possible if it is conditioned to then deliver this.
Okay. So that's in the conditions then, for that to be provided subject to all the agreements, obviously.
I think so, but the planning officer might be able to confirm for me the
Okay.
exact condition.
Okay.
And then on the car parking, I don't actually know the exact numbers at the residence currently. I have been on the site a few times checking what it looks like
fairly
before,
significant, isn't it?
before COVID. A lot of cars are there during the day though, which is quite an interesting thing and potentially quite good in terms of traffic on the road. We don't have an issue. The size of the access road is it's quite a wide access, so we don't have an issue with this, and there would be plenty of space for emergency services to come through. After that, it's private road, and it's not proposed to be adopted, so it would be completely in private ownership.
So I suppose my question relates to the private road, because on the virtual site visit that we had, we were shown a picture of that, and it was from memory, it was designed sort of on home zone principles, so which means that there's no footway. So given that we've got the park alongside, this private access route to these properties has no footway, and we've got a couple of hundred parking spaces there. And the question, I suppose, really wanted reassurance from the emergency access point of view is, assuming that there were vehicles trying to leave the site, is there space for a fire engine to get through as well, going the other way to deal with whatever might be need to be dealt with?
In principle, there would be, but obviously we wouldn't be in charge of enforcing any parking. So if parking happens on the sides, it's a private access. So it would be for the management company to ensure that that's managed.
That would be the management company's responsibility once we signed it off as a plan. Okay. Do we normally consult the emergency services on the design? Are they actually?
We would consult if we had concerns with the width of the road or anything like this, but in principle we don't have concerns. It's a question of managing parking.
Okay.
So, and because it's private, we can't do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doughty and then Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. My heritage question's been answered already with what's been covered. Going back to the CCG concern, obviously they were concerned about the number of GP places and facilities available with the extra pressure of new properties locally. Can you just confirm that the commuted sum that this was suggested has been agreed for the extra consulting rooms and ancillary facilities at local surgeries, please?
We're still negotiating it, but yeah, it's been agreed to the point that we're just working through with the CCG about the actual need and how it'll work and how it'll. But yes, there has been an agreement that we will work with them to provide what is needed. It's just exactly how that will materialise, but there has been an agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain how the affordable housing contribution is working? Am I right that there's no affordable housing on site?
Eric, can you answer that one? I can't.
There's 18.
I'm just
18 on site, 0.4 off site.
So the 0.4 will be how we've worked it out. You can't have 0.4 of a house, so that'll be a contribution.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Douglas.
So can you, or is this a question for the developer about where that housing will sit? The affordable housing.
We'll secure that through the section 106. I'm just sorry, I'm trying to find out exactly what we've. I can't recall that off the top of my head. 2 seconds.
It's page 34, paragraph 5.59.
Thank you.
18 units on site with off-site financial contribution equivalent to 0.14 per unit.
Yeah, so they've obviously said that, as I said in the update, they're working with Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust again to work about the affordable housing. I don't know exactly how that'll work, but we will secure it through the 106. So they will have that on site.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Doughty, you're still indicating, is that because you have a further question or just haven't popped the hand down yet? Thanks. Okay, Councillor Douglas, we've taken your question and okay, thank you. So Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just bring your attention to one of the objections which brought our attention to an appeal decision whereby it was decided that land that's blended into the landscape does not meet the definition of previously developed, particularly with reference to Guy Hanson's point about the harm appearing more because the land that we're talking about has had no buildings on it for such a long time. Did you take that into consideration?
Becky, I think you're
sorry.
muted.
Yeah, no, I don't know what you mean by that. There is in the principle of development how we consider that it is brownfield land, and we've explained why we consider it's brownfield land.
My question really is whether or not you took the point that was raised by the objector into consideration, who is drawing our attention to the fact that if land has blended into the landscape, then you wouldn't necessarily consider it as brownfield land.
We've taken it into consideration, but we don't necessarily agree.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pavlovic, you had a question, I think, which you've been waiting to add to that first one. Do you want to go ahead now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To some extent, Councillor Kilbane's question in respect of the local plan, you've responded to that, but I also have a sort of added question in relation to the premise relating to how this development is broken down and the number of apartments. It states in the report, and I honestly can't find the paragraph in which it states it, but it states in the report that by this application, which is predominantly apartment-led, it takes the pressure off other developments elsewhere further down the line. We seem to have had that statement, that comment, or those comments made repeatedly in recent applications that we've considered for predominantly apartment-led developments. To what extent is York's actual housing need, which seems to be increasingly for 2 and 3 bedroom townhouses, considered when those comments are made? For example, we're going to have the York Central application coming up in front of us shortly, which is another predominantly apartment-led complex. To what extent do we say, yes, we've got enough apartments now, and what we actually need is townhouses?
It's on a case-by-case basis in terms of where it is and where we'd look for the apartments to go, where we'd look for the housing to go. Obviously, we've got some bigger sites in the local plan that will come mostly as housing developments further out, whereas York Central says up to 2,500 residential units. It doesn't specifically say apartments. So it might not all be apartments. There might be some townhouses. The Reserve Matters that you've got coming up soon is for the road only. It doesn't have any housing as part of that. So that's just worth noting in terms of that. But it's where it sits and whether or not that the apartment is appropriate, given that you've already got apartments on this site, that there is also townhouses as part of it. We've looked at that in terms of the balance and considered that is acceptable.
But given the comments earlier in answer to Councillor Kilbane's, it was assessed as being suitable for around 56 properties, taking the preferred density for the size of the site. That this significant increase, predominantly of apartments, to what extent are we just cramming? And I'm using the word cramming, and I appreciate it may not be the right word, but we're cramming more and more apartments in because that's what the developers are asking for, as opposed to what the city's needs are. Because we need houses in the centre as well. You know, it's all very well saying there are other sites coming that are going to be predominantly townhouses, but if they're not where people need to live necessarily, we do need a balance of the two. You can't just say everything in York Central can be apartments.
Well, we're not saying that for York Central. We'll look at it on what comes forward and what the need is and what the developer applies for and whether or not it's appropriate. So obviously in this case, it's more than just, it's the size of it, it's the highways, it's everything that goes into the planning process that we look to see whether or not it's acceptable, the density that it is. And that's what we've done as part of this application. We've come to the conclusion that that's acceptable. And I understand what you're saying, but it is something that we look at as part of the process, and we have looked at it, and in this instance we consider that this is acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Douglas, you have a supplementary.
Yeah, it's a follow-up to what Councillor Pavlovic it was saying, really, because I had similar concern, and I had a look at what planning, main planning and area planning have approved since January. We've had 800 apartments, about 30 houses and 3 bungalows. So I would totally agree that it's very disappointing that we're not fulfilling what I see as a greater need of housing for families in the city, and it's rather concerning.
Right.
I took that as
no,
a
I see what you're
comment
saying,
rather
but
than a question, but
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cobain.
Just my understanding is that in the SHMA we need 50% 3 and 4 bedroomed houses, and I would say, you know, this is a plot right on the edge of the urban part of York, and if not here, then where?
Councillor Eyre, you've heard a further comment on this.
As part of that question, my understanding to deliver a significant amount of family housing would take a significant amount of land. So would you say it was the case that it's more likely that the vast majority of those 50% will be on larger plots? If this was on, if you were to even to use every single city centre plot, you would get a very small percentage of the total amount of townhouses you could deliver.
Yep.
And Councillor Cobain?
Just for your information, Councillor, this is a huge site that's been developed over a number of years that started out with a much more significant mix of houses to apartments, and over those years it has all been converted into apartments. I'm not sure if we're using the outline planning permission here or not. It seems to be getting picked up and dropped according to what we're talking about. But in the original outline planning permission, there were GP surgeries, there were shops, there were hairdressers, there were lots of things to for the community to use. But now, of course, all we have are apartments and a few townhouses.
Hello, it's Heidi Lehane from Legal. Sorry to interrupt.
Please do.
We're moving into debate slightly.
We are,
here.
and these are comments rather than questions.
If we could keep to the questions at this point and then keep those comments for the debate. Thank you.
That's helpful. Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question around density. So from reading the report, the units per hectare on this site would be 71, as opposed to a target density for an urban site of this type of 50 units per hectare. So we heard earlier that on the rest of the site, leaving the residents sort of to one side, there were 48 homes built and 177 apartments. So that's 225. Do officers have any sense as to what the units per hectare ratio that has been achieved on the rest of the site, and how that compares with the 71 units per hectare that is anticipated on this site? Thank you.
I don't. I'm going to see if Eric in the background knows this. Eric, do you know the answer to that? Right. It sounds like we haven't got Eric, so I can't.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Okay. If there is an officer who's able to provide us with that, maybe at a later point, that would be helpful. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I'm talking about 3.8 here, the children's services education places there. I'm just, I mean, I understand what we're talking about in pooling resources there and the figure that's there, and we may not have an answer to this here, but that seems a bit of an underestimate to me of the number of places that might be required. And I think in following on the argument about the type of housing, the sad reality is that those apartments will have young families living in them. And I'm just wondering, does anybody want to comment at all on that figure? There's nobody here. Well, obviously we've got the exec member as one of the members, but I mean, nobody want to comment on that figure, how it was arrived at?
When education look at that, they look at the number of beds. So again, the bed space will depend on whether or not it will generate a child space, and they'll have looked at that. They'll have looked if there's any need in the local school, and they'd put that all together to then work out what places there are and what the need is in the local school. So that's how it's been, that's how we've arrived at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, there are no further questions from members, and I'm certainly keen that we don't get into debate at this point, because we have a number of public speakers. So let's turn to our list of public speakers. And welcome to those who've joined us. The first of those is Celia Loughran, who represents the Terrace of York Planning Action Group. Are you there? Celia Loughran, are you?
Hello.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Thank you for joining us. The way that this works, I'm sure you're aware, is that you have the opportunity to address the committee. I understand you want to speak in objection to this. Once you've begun, you'll have 3 minutes, and if we're coming towards the end of that, I'll just give you an indication so that we don't run over that time. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so if you'd like to address the committee, thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Celia Loughran and I'm representing Terrace of York Planning Action Group. This application goes right to the heart of what local democracy is all about. We have to appeal to you today to please hear our case. If approved, this proposal, when built, will constitute a blot on the landscape, obscuring views both to and from the iconic Terrace factory building, now substantially enhanced and refurbished. It will also detract from its setting in the middle of an important conservation area of York, with its unique collection of 9 listed buildings next to the Greenbelt. In relation to law and policy, the preservation of conservation areas is clear. The Planning Act of 1990 offers statutory protection. York's own policy guidance stresses the importance and protection of conservation areas, but particularly so where there are also listed buildings. In 2019, new national guidance about the importance of high-quality design emphasised conservation, enhancement and sustainability. In terms of case law, notably the Barnwell Manor and Forge Field cases, emphasis is placed on the importance of doing no harm, even where the harm is less than substantial. However, there is undoubtedly a need to provide more housing in York. In relation to this site, there is no reason why development sympathetic to the setting cannot be achieved. A good quality, low-rise proposal and one that is compliant with York's now advanced local plan for a maximum of 56 dwellings on site would be welcomed. In terms of sustainability, it's important to mention just one example of why this application should be refused. The current problem of overdevelopment of the area will be further compounded. In addition, the failure to adhere to York's own policy guidance regarding density will increase this effect. It is estimated that there will be at least 500 apartments in the vicinity. Most of these will be for 1 or 2 bedrooms, yet housing for growing families has stalled, particularly in this part of York, where the marketing assessment states that 50% of new development should have 3 or 4 bedrooms. This application offers very little variety of housing type and fails any test of sustainability in relation to the need to develop a balanced and mixed community.
Can you draw to a, let me just stop you there if you will. I know you have more time, but let me just stop you for a moment. Unfortunately, whilst you were speaking, in fact, towards the beginning of the time, we unfortunately dropped out of connection. Councillor Eyre, who I understand is back with the meeting now. Okay. Although I can't see him on screen. Councillor Eyre, are you? Councillor Eyre, I'm told that he's back in the meeting, but I can't see or hear him. Let me just wait for a moment and see what happens.
We've lost him again, Chair.
We've lost him again. Okay. Then in that case, I'm very sorry to have interrupted you. I was hoping that we would be able to bring Councillor Eyre back in, and it may have been that I would have asked you just so that we hadn't, so every member would have had the opportunity to hear what you say to actually say, would you please begin again? But as we've lost Councillor Eyre, maybe just to continue where you were?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Right. There's been a huge effort to get this application through, but in doing so, important safeguards have been, in our view, set aside. Many people are troubled about the proposals, which have raised much concern. There are 169 letters of objection, as well as clear representations from locally based organisations, including York Civic Trust, the National Trust, and our neighbours at the Racecourse and the Chocolate Works. In summing up this application, it is not suitable for this conservation area. It contains many flaws, lacks aspiration, and has little to recommend it for the future. We respectfully ask that you refuse it. Thank you for listening to our case.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the interruption there, but I'm sure you understand that these things are somewhat fraught, and we're all dependent on connections. Please do stay with us for a moment, because I'm going to give the committee the opportunity of asking any questions they might have. I don't see any.
Chair,
yes.
Can I just clarify with you and with legal that as Councillor Ed didn't actually attend as part of the meeting that submission.
Yes, indeed.
Is he allowed to take any further part in this meeting?
My understanding, although it would be good to get the legal advice, would be that in order for Councillor to continue with the meeting and vote, I would need to ask the public speaker to repeat what she had said. Am I correct?
Thank you. It's Heidi Hayden from legal. That is correct. It was more than a few seconds. So we have the option to ask for the whole of the speaker's comments to be repeated. It sounded like they may have been scripted, written down, and if that's something that she could do, otherwise he would be prevented from voting as he hasn't heard all of the considerations.
That's fine. Can I ask Councillor, how much of that submission did you hear?
None.
Okay. And then would I ask the public speaker, would you be willing to repeat that?
Well, yes, I suppose I'll have to, won't I?
Well,
I've got enough energy to do it.
That's very kind of you. So
okay.
Again, you understand it is not desirable, but we do want to make sure that every member of the committee has heard. So please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, councillors. This application goes right to the heart of what local democracy is all about. We have to appeal to you today to please hear our case. If approved, this proposal, when built, will constitute a blot on the landscape, obscuring views both to and from the iconic Terry's factory building, now substantially enhanced and refurbished. It will also detract from its setting in the middle of an important conservation area of York, with its unique collection of 9 listed buildings next to the green belt. In relation to law and policy, the preservation of conservation areas is clear. The Planning Act of 1990 offers statutory protection. York's own policy guidance stresses the importance and protection of conservation areas, but particularly so where there are also listed buildings. In 2019, new national guidance about the importance of high-quality design emphasised conservation, enhancement and sustainability. In terms of case law, notably the Barnwell Manor and Forge Field cases, emphasis is placed on the importance of doing no harm, even where the harm is less than substantial. However, there is undoubtedly a need to provide more housing in York. In relation to this site, there's no reason why development sympathetic to the setting cannot be achieved. A good quality, low-rise proposal, and one that is compliant with York's now advanced local plan for a maximum of 56 dwellings on site would be welcomed. In terms of sustainability, it's important to mention just one example of why the application should be refused. The current problem of overdevelopment of the area will be further compounded if this proposal is agreed. In addition, the failure to adhere to York's own policy guidance regarding density will increase this effect. It is estimated that there will be at least 500 apartments in the vicinity. Most of these will be 1 or 2 bedrooms, yet housing for growing families has stalled, particularly in this part of York, where the market assessment states that 50% of new development should have 3 or 4 bedrooms. This application offers very little variety of housing type and fails any test of sustainability in relation to the need to develop a balanced and mixed community. There's been a huge effort to get this application through, but in doing so, important safeguards have been, in our view, set aside. Many people are troubled about the proposals, which have raised much concern. There are 169 letters of objection, as well as clear representations from locally based organisations, including York Civic Trust, the National Trust, and our neighbours at the Racecourse and the Chocolate Works. In summing up this application, it is not suitable for this conservation area. It contains many flaws, lacks aspiration, and has little to recommend it for the future. We respectfully ask that you refuse it. Thank you for listening to our case.
And thank you for bearing with us. I don't see any members raising hands to ask questions. No. Thank you very much. And of course, you're aware that although you'll be leaving the meeting at this point, you can continue to watch on the live stream.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ray Calpin, again, a resident in objection. Are you there? Are you able to address the committee? Mr. Calpin?
Am I okay to speak now?
You are indeed. You have the opportunity to address the committee. You have 3 minutes to do so. Please go ahead.
Thank you. According to the York Heritage Impact Appraisal, building in this area is highly likely to cause substantial harm to the significance of Terry's factory. In the light of this comment, and in my opinion, the first thing to consider is the height of the proposal and how this affects the important views from the south. To this end, I have provided you with a series of images that clearly demonstrate how the proposal, if approved, would visually impact upon the listed building. I hope these images prove helpful. The prime cause of a lot of the problems associated with this proposal are a result of the height of the 3 tallest apartment blocks, which are all 4 stories. The impact appraisal indicates proposals should be low in height. Approval for 4 stories has never been granted on the proposed development site, or indeed anywhere else on the land to the south of Terry's factory. In fact, one of the main reasons for a unanimous refusal of the 2006 application was the harm caused by the height of the 4-storey apartment blocks on the views. The second application in 2009 was only approved in 2013 after the 4-storey offices were lowered to 3 stories. This is clearly proven on the 2 documents provided, i.e. the parameter plan and the building heights drawing. Moving on to the reasons for refusal. 3 of the reasons that the 2006 application was unanimously refused were the detrimental impact upon the conservation area, the landscaping, and the setting of the listed buildings. Regarding the setting of the listed building, one cause for refusal was, quote, long views of the listed building would be harmed due to the height of the proposed new buildings, unquote. As a consequence of this cause for refusal, the proposed 2006 scheme failed to satisfy the terrace development brief and other relevant guidance and policies that existed at that time. Therefore, in the same way that the 2006 application failed, I suggest that the current proposal must also fail when the same 3 detrimental impacts are assessed against present governing criteria, which includes the terrace development brief, the National Planning Policy Framework, and the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Area Act. Lastly, more than 96% of the proposed development site has returned to a natural state, and it no longer satisfies the National Planning Policy Framework definition of previously developed land. This is verified in the High Court ruling of Dodson Hands versus the Secretary of State on the meaning of land that is now treated for planning purposes as having been previously developed, because there is now no evidence of the previous use and the site has blended into the landscape. Correspondence from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government states, and I quote, the glossary definition suggests only that in some locations land has become so overgrown that it could be seen as greenfield land for planning purposes, unquote. Therefore, I believe that this site should now be regarded as greenfield. I would welcome questions certainly about the previously developed land and about the substantial harm aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Calpin. Again, I invite members if they have any questions. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Calpin. You mentioned that you thought that the application breached NPPF. Can you be more specific which parts of NPPF you think it breaches?
Mr. Calpin, you still with us?
You're just muted, Mr. Calpin. If you press *6 on your handset again.
Right. I'm sorry, I can't give the great details of any of these, but I can guarantee that if you look through each of the Terrace Development Brief and the NPPF and the Planning Listed Buildings Conservation Area Act, this item is covered.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions from members at this point, so thank you very much, Mr. Calpin. And again, you'll be leaving the meeting, but you'll be able to continue watching. Thanks for your contribution.
Thank you.
The next public speaker, Mary Urmston, who again wants to speak in objection. Mary Urmston, are you there? Mary Urmston, if you can hear me and you're ready to address the committee, would you please do so?
Hi, Mary. If you press *6 on
Hello?
your handset, that's the one.
That's fine. We can hear you now. That's fine. Thank you for joining us. As you have probably been following things to this point, then you'll realise that you have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. Mary, can you turn the volume off or turn the webcast off in the background, please?
I've just turned it off.
Oh,
yes.
perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
Because there's some delay on it, isn't there?
Okay. Thank you. Do go ahead.
Thank you. So I have had to rewrite a little bit of this, having heard what's been discussed earlier. So I'm speaking as a resident of Fulford, from where the Terrace Factory and Clock Tower are visible from many viewpoints. I'd like to begin with the outline approval because it hasn't always been clear whether that planning permission could or should influence your decision today. The fact is the outline scheme can never ever be completed. It's expired. In other words, there is no fallback position to take into account, and it should be disregarded in my view. Of course, a previous decision by a planning committee can be a material consideration, but in this case, I don't believe that any weight at all should be attached to it. This is because the outline scheme was entirely different to this one, and the resolution to approve it was made more than 10 years ago. Since then, planning policy and planning law has moved on. For example, we now have the NPPF with its strict heritage protections. Having just listened to what the Conservation Officer has said, I would point out that the removal of the former factory buildings that were previously attached to the residence was considered to be a public benefit in justifying the addition of a 6th floor to the residence and its conversion to residential use. That permission was granted through a full application in 2015, and the buildings were demolished at that time. So I believe that the openness of the site as it is now should be the starting point for any assessment on views towards the building. I think this is really important. My second point is the impact on the conservation area, particularly on the Peace Garden. This public open space is acknowledged to be one of the 3 key spaces in the Terrace Conservation Area. It's described in the appraisal as a soft green oasis where wildlife is both audible and visible. The tall apartment blocks and townhouses right next to it will not only block views from the garden across the site, it will also harm its peaceful character by introducing traffic noise and general disturbance from so many houses, many with balconies. I believe that this irreversible harm to the conservation area, together with the irreversible harm to the setting of the listed factory, provide you with very strong justification to refuse this application. But in addition, there is clear conflict with so many of your own planning policies, above all with policy SS14, but also with many others. This is not sustainable development. It's overdevelopment of the very worst kind. Our city and its residents deserve so much better,
So I ask you please to refuse it and send a clear message to the developer that you will not accept any development on this site which destroys our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Again, an opportunity for members of the committee just to ask any questions. And again, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mary. Mary, towards the end there, you said this was overdevelopment. In what way do you think it's overdevelopment?
Well, there are too many houses on the site. The development goes right up under the trees. The parking is completely under the canopy of all the trees on that western boundary. The whole site is covered with built development, and there's so little green space. And the density, that site is said to be by the developer 1.16 hectares. So that means that the 92 dwellings that they've got now is actually around, it's almost 80 per hectare. So that's what I mean by overdevelopment. It's too tall, the footprints are huge, and I don't think that's acceptable, not on a site with such heritage value for the city.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Again, I don't see any other questions from members, so thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure you'll continue to watch with interest through the live stream.
I will.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
A further public speaker, Johnny Hayes. Again, I understand wants to speak in objection. Can you hear me, Johnny?
I can. Can you hear me?
Good. Excellent. Do you want to go ahead and address the committee?
Yes, please. This afternoon is one of the most important planning meetings in York heritage terms for a number of years, because we're discussing one of York's most important buildings, and in my view, one of the finest present views in the country. The former Terry's factory, sitting as it does alongside the racecourse with open countryside to the south, is without doubt a wonderful sight. It's a vital part of York's industrial heritage. It is much loved, particularly by the thousands of local residents whose families have worked there for generations. The draft local plan, section 152, identifies buildings of strategic importance to the significance of York. The city's landmark monuments in particular, they are identified as the city walls and bars, the Minster, churches, guild halls, Clifford's Tower, also structures that are associated with chocolate manufacturing, of which I believe that Terry's is by far the finest example. The local plan then refers to how this site should be developed. The site, it says, is suitable for 56 dwellings. It then continues to say, this includes conserving and enhancing the special character of the racecourse and Terry's factory conservation areas. And development should complement existing views to the factory and clock tower. Now, the officer's report fails to adequately reflect the draft local plan nor the importance of this building. These four-storey flats, without doubt, will severely harm the setting in which this wonderful building sits. And of that there can be no doubt. The draft local plan provides clear material evidence that this is an application that should be rejected. But the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraphs 193 and 194, provides you with firm guidance on why you should reject this application. Now,
can you draw to a close within the next 30 seconds, Johnny? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. 193 has been read out, which basically says the weight for conservation should be increased with the importance of the building. So the weight for this very important building should be substantially in favour of conservation. But finally, paragraph 194 says any harm to or loss of the significance of a designated heritage asset from its alteration or destruction or from development within its setting should require clear and convincing justification. I do not feel there is clear justification for this development.
Thank you. Thank you for contribution. I don't see any members with questions at this point. So again, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us and speaking as you have. And again, I'm sure you'll be watching with interest through the live stream.
Thank you. I certainly will be. I'm not leaving.
And we move on to our next public speaker. I hope Mr. John Young is available.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Excellent. Well,
go ahead and address the committee.
Good afternoon, officers and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee. And apologies if you've watched the video that I sent round to you all, but I'm just going to repeat myself. So I'd like to address the lack of community infrastructure to support our very welcome new and existing residents in this corner of South Bank. The objective of a responsible council is surely to provide a safe, effective and attractive environment for all residents by maintaining and enhancing the community infrastructure. And I will argue that this is not the case for the City of York Council. The residents and Chocolate Works developments have added over 800 dwellings, and the proposed Stonebridge development will add another 92. Right, so conservatively assuming 2 people and 1 car per dwelling, this means 1,800 new residents and 900 cars. Right, the previous Micklegate census population was 12,000, actually nearer 13, but I'm superstitious. A ward population, right, a ward population needs uplift of 15%, just concentrated in a very small area. Now, I've analysed the Section 106 developers' contributions as part of my citizens audit work, using often complex and apparently erroneous data from City of York Council. The Chocolate Works and residents' contributions total 1.2 million, with stated expenditure of 145,000, leaving a balance of 1.1 million. I can't tell you specifically what the expenditure has been on, but then neither can City of York. I've filed a Freedom of Information request so I could tie it back to the all payments data set, but City of York Council said they don't have that detail. So we don't know what the disbursements have been. Now, this all probably points to spreadsheets held by planning far from the light of members, public, and ultimately legal inspection. The draft accounts only mention most of the expenditure was to do with the stadium in Huntingdon. We do know nothing has gone into our local community infrastructure. A church community hall, which desperately needs a new roof to stem the leaks. A soggy scout hut with a tarpaulin, and they need containers for dry storage. And Jorvik surgery, which is no longer fit for purpose with the additional population. So therefore I object to this application, ask it to be deferred until sufficient maintenance and upgrades are made to our community infrastructure so we can welcome our new residents to what is arguably the best place to live in York. Now, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much for your contribution. Do members have any questions they want to put to Mr. Young? Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Mr. Young. Are you? I'm trying to work out what you're saying in terms of the Section 106 money. You're saying that the money hasn't been spent locally on the developments that have already happened. Is that what you're saying? And are you then saying that you don't think there's going to be any more community infrastructure built on the back of this application?
Well, Councillor Kilbane, the way it works is the Section 106 agreements drawn up by the City of York Council are very, very tight. So it's open space, education, highways. And therefore, even if you wanted to spend the money on the local infrastructure that we need, the actual 106 agreements, the legal wording within them, says you can't, because, you know, it's either got to be on the Naismar for open space, or it's got to be something to do with highways. And so then the 106 agreements themselves, even though it's welcome money from the developers, which is ultimately a tax on the new residents, very welcome to get those contributions. But unfortunately, I can't see a way that could be spent on the infrastructure that we need. I would personally go back to the developers and say, claim your money back with interest, as it says in the agreements, and then deploy that money locally. That would look rather bad for the council then.
I don't see any other questions at the moment. Councillor Eyre.
Yes, thank you. I did have a chance to look at the video you sent through. Thanks very much for that. It was very helpful, John. Of the 1.2 million you highlighted, am I right in saying around 900,000 of that was to the local schools, and is therefore has been earmarked? So it's only around about 0.3 that you're questioning where it's gone to.
I'm quite pleased to hear that, because the information which I was given by the City of York does not have that. I have got what the disbursements were but not directly from the City of York Council through a Freedom of Information request. I wouldn't bother looking on the open data set, because when I raised it in the Citizens Order back in 2018 and said it was out of date, it's still out of date. It's the 1st of January 2017. So I'd be quite interested to know where you got your information, and maybe we could compare notes. Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions at this point, so thank you, Mr. Young. Really appreciate you speaking to the committee, and I'm in no doubt at all you'll watch with interest through the live stream. Thank you. Thank you. So we come to our next speaker, again in objection, William Darby, from the York Racecourse, Chief Executive of York Racecourse. Can you hear me, William?
Yes, Chair, I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. Do go ahead in your own time to address the committee. I'll give you notices if we come towards the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, speaking on behalf of York Racecourse, we've been on the current site since 1731 with a freehold landowner of the property, the land to the south of the development in what we would know as our coach and car parks, and the leasehold owner on the western boundary of the property, the racecourse complex, as you will know. We didn't object to any of the other planning applications on the Chocolate Works site over the last 12 or 14 years, and we were supportive of the outline permission in 2006 that suggested a mixed-use development with residential plus retail plus offices, which seems to have been forgotten and disbanded in the intervening time. We really, the elements of our objection are the setting in the Terry's and Racecourse development area on the edge of the green belt, and in the proximity to our property. The proximity of it both to the Grade 2 star listed Terry's building, the residence, and the listed buildings on our site, which has the oldest grandstand on a sporting venue anywhere in the world, just 100 meters or so from this development. And how close it comes to our boundary, both on the western edge and the southern edge. The height of the proposed development, especially the 4-story elements, which scale to, as we've heard, 13.9 meters, so 2/3 of the height of the iconic residence building, the Terry's factory building, and those stunning views you get from the south and the west. So both views affected by ourselves of the building and all visitors to York from the south, and the density of the development focused very much on on 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and 65% more than was in the development plan. So those are the key areas of our concern about the development. Two sort of further elements.
Draw to a close, but go on.
Yeah, 2 further elements. Just we are a busy and a noisy site. Outside racing, we have 700 events a year, and it's making sure that if you are minded to approve, despite everything this, that a condition is put on the developer to make sure sound insulation is to the fore. And the last point I'd like to make, Chair, is about the link through to Racecourse Road, which came very late in the development. We are concerned about people parking on Racecourse Road and walking through. There's lots of parking in the area, parking congestion, parking concerns. We're concerned that there's not a lot of parking capacity, and that link is a very late addition that we have serious concerns over that nobody's talked to us about.
Thank you very much. Do stay with us for a moment, because I know there are some questions. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you, William, do you envisage any problems for the actual racing, the proximity to the track during race days, and the impact on the longer distance races?
I don't think on the operation of the racecourse. Obviously, the area naturally gets congested with road traffic on a race day, and we have a traffic management plan that we work with the City and Highways to develop. As someone said earlier, we're adding a substantial number more residents and therefore vehicle owners into the area. And we have had in the past, the developer needs to control that their highway, their own road within the development, to ensure that no sort of racecourse traffic, if that's the right word, parks illegally. And in the past, people have sort of used the residents as a drop-off parking, and it's up to the managing agent really to manage their own road in that regard. But not on the race day operation. Certainly on the race day visuals and the aesthetics of the area.
Councillor Doughty.
Thanks, Chair. It's not a question to the speaker, actually. I just need to give apologies. I'm leaving the meeting. I just wanted to say, rather than just leave without saying, so that you didn't wonder what had happened to me.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that you need to leave, but we understand.
I do apologise.
Thank you. Okay. So for the record, Councillor Doughty has now left the meeting. I don't see any other questions from members. So thank you very much, Mr. Darby, for joining us. And as I've said to other speakers, you can, of course, watch the remainder of this meeting through the live stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We have 2 more speakers. The next is Stephen Longstaff, agent for the applicant in support. But I understand that Mr. Longstaff is joined by 2 others, Dan Postel and Dave Kopak. I think Mr. Longstaff will address the committee, but the others who are available are joining us in order to be able to answer questions that might be raised by members. Councillor Fisher, I see you're raising your hand at this point.
Yes. Could I just ask, before this presentation is given, I'm given the chance to go and get a replacement battery charger. I've just noticed my laptop's not charging, and it will probably run out of battery during this.
We'll wait. Hurry, go on.
I'll be very quick. I've got a spare one downstairs.
Are you there, Mr. Longstaff?
I am, Chair, yes.
Okay. Would you mind bearing with us just for a moment whilst we enable one of our members just to make sure his battery doesn't run out?
Of course, of course.
Chair, can I just ask, whilst we're waiting for Councillor Fisher, after the submissions from the public speakers, are we likely to have a break?
I think that would be very welcomed. Would other members I had been thinking so myself. I'd welcome it too.
Leave
So
it this
let's,
way.
if we can get to the point in the meeting where we've heard from the public speakers, I think then we would take an adjournment before moving on. Is that
Thank you,
okay?
Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Fisher, are you? You're back in the room.
This one seems to be charging, so we're okay.
Good, excellent. Then, Mr. Longstaff, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and members. This application is the last piece of the Terry's jigsaw on the western side of Bishopthorpe Road and will secure the comprehensive redevelopment of a 3-acre previously developed, sustainably located site that was once occupied by a range of large factory buildings. In bringing forward this application, we have been very conscious of the changed nature of the Terry site in recent years, which, notwithstanding the outline approval for mixed-use development granted in 2015, is now predominantly residential in character, with the result that previous consented options for office, hotel and other employment uses are no longer appropriate. The other key factor that has influenced the evolution of the development has been its location within the conservation area and its proximity to nearby Grade 2 listed buildings, which we've obviously heard quite a lot about so far. In response to feedback from officers, stakeholders and the public, both before and during the application process, the scheme has evolved significantly. The scheme that is now before you for decision today, we believe, makes efficient use of this brownfield site within the main urban area, will deliver well-designed buildings within a landscape setting that take a number of design cues from the residents, but do not seek to mirror it or to be a pastiche. Is proportionate and appropriate in terms of scale and massing. There was a site section drawing submitted with the planning application that showed a sort of longer distance view than the one that was shown on the officer's presentation. If possible, I would suggest that is put up on the screen at some point, because it really is very useful to show the context. It is respectful of its surroundings in terms of layout, appearance and materials. It does not in any way compete with the dominance of the residence and clock tower than wider views from the south, west or east. It will meet the Council's targets for energy efficiency, carbon reduction, accessible by a variety of modes of transport, meets the Council standards in terms of on-site car parking and cycle storage, will contribute towards the Council's 5-year housing land supply. It will deliver a range of house types in 10 years, including 1, 2 and 3 bed apartments, including duplex 2-storey apartments and 7 townhouses. This is considered a more appropriate development than a more traditional housing scheme, given the context of the site and the relationship with the extremely dominant residence building. There are some images within the design access statement. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to see them, which did test the option of something smaller, which just didn't feel like it worked architecturally. The scheme will deliver 20% affordable housing in line with the Council's policy. It will deliver a high standard of residential amenity for residents of the new dwellings and maintain the amenity of those living in the residence. It will deliver contributions towards education, open space, transportation in line with Council policy. It is inevitable that a new development within the conservation area or close to a listed building will have some impact on the heritage assets. However, by careful design, that impact has been minimised in this instance, and as highlighted by the officers, any harm that might be considered to result from the development is limited and more than outweighed by the public benefits of making efficient use of a brownfield site, the material contribution to the housing land supply in the city that the site will deliver. Overall, we feel that the scheme achieves the necessary planning balance between the various competing interests of heritage, ecology, design, highways, amenity, surrounding land uses, as demonstrated by the positive consultation responses received from the relevant council consultees. It is demonstrably a sustainable development that accords with national and local planning policy, and we would ask that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions listed and the signing of Section 106. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I'm aware that was a little more than 3 minutes, but given the number
Apologies.
No, don't worry at all. I think given the number of speakers we've had who've been in objection, I didn't want to shut you down, but there will be questions. First of all, Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. Could you say a bit more about why when there was an assessment done of the potential of a low-rise development, you mentioned that was found to be that it didn't work architecturally. Could you say a bit more about that and what kind of led to that conclusion?
I've also got no problem. I've also got the architect on the line, who's probably better placed to answer that than I am. I'm sure he'll tell you in a more eloquent way than I can.
Hello there, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Hi, so I'm Daniel Postel, the architect from the scheme, and yes, as sort of was alluded to early on in the sort of pre-application process that was very much iterative and collaborative between ourselves and the council and many other parties, we did also investigate the idea of a standard domestic scale development of houses on the site. As it was alluded to just then, because of the context of both the residence and the race course, you're able to see it within the design access statement. The houses are absolutely dwarfed by these larger buildings, so you result in a complete lack of placemaking and overlooked gardens, and it just isn't really suitable. It's very clear from the images created within the design access statement that it just isn't a suitable development for that location, in our opinion, and it was echoed with the council through the pre-application process as well.
Can I just ask a supplementary to that?
Go ahead, Councillor Pavlovic. Yeah.
Thank you. So why are you building 7 houses there then? Which are going to be even more dwarfed by the development as it stands?
So the townhouses are actually 3 stories, which again it does help with the pardon me, sorry. Yeah, the townhouses are actually 3 stories, so it does help with the visual mass of giving our site its own placemaking while not being completely dwarfed by the surrounding buildings, but still holding its own with regard to the greater context of the site. So that they are taller than a standard domestic dwelling.
Okay. Councillor Pavlovic, you had raised your hand anyway. Was there
yes, I had
another question?
Thank you, Chair. You made mention the original speaker of the planning permission that was granted, and then you stated that it was no longer efficient, and then you used the word efficient further into your submission. Can you explain to me what you mean by the word efficient? Efficient for whom?
Efficient use of the site in general. Well, it's obviously clearly planning policy directs you towards making efficient use of previously developed sites, and obviously taking into consideration the context of the site, any constraints of the site. So that obviously exercise was done, and that resulted in the scheme that was sort of presented as part of planning application initially. Obviously, subsequent to that, there has been revisions to the planning application and to the scheme in response to comments from various parties.
Sorry, I probably didn't explain myself particularly well. The 209 application that was granted in 2013. Can you explain to me what has changed the efficiency of the site now compared to the one that was granted?
I'm not sure I used the word efficient in relation to that sentence.
Well, my mistake. But you take the general point. Can you tell me what has changed?
Yeah. So the character of the. Well, I think the point I was trying to make was that the character of the site had changed to something that was more residential than what was initially envisaged by the outline approval, which was obviously a much more mixed-use development. That it had been touched on in a few parts in the discussions today. And obviously, that previous consent had options for office, hotel, and other employment uses that were no longer considered, no longer being considered appropriate. And I do believe there was a period of marketing that was done on some of those uses, and end operators did not come forward. hence why I believe that you've ended up with a scheme or a wider development that's more residential than perhaps initially envisaged.
Okay, thank you. Councillor de Gorn and then Councillor Kilbane.
I've got a couple of transport-related questions. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
On page 34 of our report, there's reference to the section 106, sustainable transport and a contribution towards City Car Club membership. But I couldn't see anywhere in the report a sort of dedicated bay for car club vehicles. Is that because they're on a neighbouring already available within the resident site, or if not, will you be able to provide something? And the second question, I'll just do that as well, was the reference to the cycling and walking access to the Sustrans network to the west of the site, which I think is really important from the point of view of sustainable transport. Is that something which you would be willing to work with the racecourse and the council on ensuring that that's an attractive option for residents?
Yeah, I'd say the first one. Yes, we'd be more than happy to work with the required parties and bodies to make that an appropriate and attractive route. Obviously, we can pick those up, obviously subject to any decision today, taking forward conditions, things like that. Just since in response to the car club question, yes, there's one space to be allocated within the car park. It's just not showed on the plans at this stage.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a number of questions. I'm happy to break in them if anybody else wants to come in with a question. Did I hear you right in your presentation where you said that you accept that the development causes harm to the heritage asset?
I didn't say it had some impact on the heritage asset. I think there's different interpretations and different levels of harm and impact. Clearly, again, we heard from the conservation officer earlier in the presentations, and everyone has agreed that we're in the realms of less than substantial harm in the planning policy test. So I've said, yeah, so limited impact.
Okay, thanks. I'm good to go again, Chair?
Please do. I'll let you ask all your questions unless I see a queue building up, so go ahead.
Can I ask why you've applied for 92 dwellings instead of the 52 that we call for in the local plan?
So this is obviously sort of relevant to what we were discussing sort of earlier in relation to why, as a team and as a design team, don't consider that standard residential development is appropriate on the site. I believe, or it would just seem to me that 56 figure comes from has been derived from what would be a more standard sort of residential development of standard housing. Yes, so basically as a design team, there was a series of pre-application discussions, the architects doing constraints and opportunities plans, and sort of derived from that is obviously you come to a scheme which you then submit for planning approval. There's been a lot of pre-application work, and there's been a lot of work during the course of the planning application itself. And again, as mentioned earlier, that the scheme has been amended considerably during that process in response to comments that we've received. So it has been an iterative process in that sense.
I mean, obviously the 52 dwellings could have been of any type. So what you're saying is the application for 92 instead of 52 has got nothing to do with trying to maximise profits?
No, I would say it is to do with what is considered, or we consider to be an appropriate development for that site based on the constraints and opportunities that site offers.
Okay, thanks. And also, can you explain to the committee, in terms of the local plan again, how your application respects the character and fabric of the wider Terry's factory site, how it conserves and enhances the special character and appearance of the site in Tadcaster Road and the racecourse and the whole conservation area, and how it complements the existing views of the factory and clock tower.
Probably the architect's better placed to answer that one if possible. Dan?
Hello, you've been able to hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, so again, it's been a very long process from very early stages where we worked, we had 2 different pre-application meetings and many meetings through the application process over the last couple of years. We, from a start point, as was mentioned previously, we wanted to create a development which both had its own individual placemaking, but also respected the wider context. So the tone and palette of materials, of high quality materials and details that we're using take influence from the residents, from the racecourse, from the townhouse schemes to the north, and then further to that, pardon me, the high quality materials that we're sort of proposing to use on the site sort of speak to the wider character, but we also investigated a solid void relationship of the residence itself so that we could mimic the solid void ratio of the openings on our own building in comparison to the residence. So again, keeping it in the context of the wider site. But we also, as part of the initial master planning, were keen to enhance and develop these sorts of boulevards that run the whole way through the site and almost frame the views of the residents, so that centrally our central boulevard on the site that separates the 2 main apartment blocks is central on the elevation of the residents. Which again it helps assist with any longer range views, and again there have been a number of CGI images submitted which show the sort of lack of impact almost of our proposed development. We've also made sure that the massing is within the main mass of the residence elevation, so that it doesn't sort of jut out and impact any views in that way. And we're also below generally the tree line along the southern boundary, which is, again, it's very thick in summer, but also our CGIs were completed when there were few leaves in winter. So again, that's a sort of reduced impact, and we've really carefully considered the mass, scale, materiality and tone of the development in that sort of wider setting.
Thank you. Councillor Cobain, is that all your questions? Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions at the moment. Yes, I do. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you how you're going to organise the affordable housing on site? Will it be spread throughout all the buildings or in one area opposed to another?
Dan, are you okay to pick that one up again?
So yes, so it's in the sort of U-shaped block, and it's been worked up in conjunction with the affordable housing sort of provider and the client. And there's a good range and mix of units from duplexes, 1, 2, 3 bedroom units.
Councillor Cobain.
Are you going to waive the management and service fees for the affordable housing?
That is the level of the service charge has not been set yet, but as mentioned earlier, there's advanced discussions taking place with Joseph Rowntree, who are the likely registered provider that will take them on. Obviously, they're a well-established RP in York, and it'll be ensured that any service charges are equitable and affordable.
Would that be a no then?
I said those discussions are still ongoing.
So you may waive the service charge, because obviously one of the problems with affordable housing in apartment blocks is the management and service fees are not affordable.
Sorry, I've got someone from Stonebridge on the line. If I could pass that over to them. Dave, you available to answer that one?
Good afternoon, councillors. It's Dave Kopak. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
I just wanted to touch on that the dealings we've currently entered into heads of terms with Joseph Rowntree, and we are well aware from previous council meetings and discussions that we've had with councillors the importance of service charges, providing the dwellings isn't enough. It's ensuring that they remain affordable, and that will be taken into account, as Joseph Rowntree are also well aware, and which is why they are so highly regarded. And that will be, we don't have definitive figures yet, but they will be approved by both parties and remain affordable. We understand the importance, and it's a key point relative to affordable, which Councillor Kilbane has previously mentioned, and we've absolutely taken on board.
It's good to hear that. Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Can you explain to us how the ground rent, seeing as they're going to be on leasehold basis, I imagine, what are your contract terms in that respect of when it goes up and by how much?
Try to keep passing these on, but Dave, is that something else you could answer as well, possible?
Sorry, councillors, I've muted myself. I'm back again. This is something, again, the actual legal agreement will be carried out. Like I said, we don't have all the figures to hand yet. They will be firmed up, first of all, hopefully following planning approval, which then enables us to finalise all figures that need to go into the calculations for discussions with Joseph Rowntree. And it's understanding that that is a mechanism that they will utilise, and again, that is why they're on the council list, so we understand.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions at this point, so can I thank not just Stephen Longstaff, but Dan Postler and Dave Kopak, who've been answering those questions, and I'm sure you'll watch with interest as we continue this meeting. Our final public speaker is Councillor Johnny Crawshaw, and I'm hoping you're there, Johnny.
Good evening. Yes, can you hear me all right?
Good, excellent. Do go ahead.
Thank you. So, as you know, I'm the ward councillor for Micklegate, and I'm speaking to you this evening because I consider that there are clear and defendable grounds by which you can and should reject this application today. I think everyone pretty much has been realistic about the need for development on the site, and I think that you've already heard from Johnny Hayes about 2 paragraphs of the MPPF, which this site doesn't meet. I think the current proposals also fail a number of local plan policies, namely SS14, DP3, H2, D1 and D5. And in my view, the overall planning balance set out in your report between harm and public benefit is wrong. In very simple terms, this development harms the setting of the Grade 2 listed building and represents a final act in the gross overdevelopment of the former Chocolate Works site. This harm cannot be outweighed by the public benefits, since in my view, the only public or people benefiting from this development will be the developers themselves. I accept some of what's been said about the 2009 outline application, but I think that Guy Hanson's point about consistency in the decision making is relevant here. And I'd like to draw your attention to what was said by the original developer in 2009, Grantside, when they were bringing that application forward for the site. They said, and I quote, "This development will provide a massive boost to the York economy with around 2,500 permanent jobs created and about 100 construction jobs throughout the building project." They went on to say that they had, quote, "worked extremely hard with the council officers, the Civic Trust, ward councillors, local residents and the community forum to come up with a scheme that was acceptable." And the officer report at the time said, quote, "The economic, social and environmental benefits of the new scheme significantly outweigh any possible disadvantages." And I think I would generally have agreed with that at the time, with that outline application as it was. The planning committee certainly did, and that application was granted. And I just want to go through you the list of what was approved for the site and give you an update of what's actually been delivered. So approval was given for business use, B1, we've not got a lot of that. Assisted living accommodation residential institution, C2, yeah, we got that. Very high end, not very affordable for most people in South Bank. Residential, C3, yeah, lots and lots of that. But one of the things that's been interesting in lockdown is it's shown how little of the apartment blocks are actually occupied. We had approval for hotels and ancillary leisure, C1, nope, didn't get that. Community facilities including the health centre and a doctor's surgery, nope. Children's nursery, nope. And by the way, we only now have one nursery left in the ward that will take under 3s. There was approval for an exhibition space, not got that yet. Leisure uses, well, there's a children's play area, if that counts. Retail, none of that. Financial and professional services, nope. A restaurant and cafe, that's been given permission, but it hasn't yet been built. A bar, no, didn't get that. And some living working units with associated servicing. And I've not seen any of that, although I guess a lot of us are now working from home. So you can see the site was sold to the planning department and the local community as being a mixed-use development that would add significant benefits to the wider community and the city. And it's worth keeping that in mind when you're thinking about York Central next month. Of course, since then, what has happened is piece by piece, application by application, the community facilities have been removed, the 2,500 jobs have failed to materialise. Most unforgivably of all, perhaps, a lot of the affordable housing provision has been made unaffordable or unusable through those service charges and management fees. And so I think what I'd just like to sum up and say is, I'll be very happy to take questions and elaborate on any of those points, but the wider context is really important here. So all I'd like to say then is there can be no question that this application must be refused on the grounds of overdevelopment, combined with the harm caused to the setting of the Grade 2 listed building and the failure to meet all or significant aspects of local plan policies SS14, DP3, H2, D1 and D5. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll just wait for a moment to see if there are any questions from members, but there are. I were disappointed if it wasn't a question from Councillor Kilbane.
so would I.
Well, we are here to serve the public. Can you be a bit more? You threw a whole load of letters and numbers at us there instead of about the local plan that you believe this development's breaching. Can you just briefly tell us what bits of the local plan you think are in breach?
Yeah, so I'll try to go through as succinctly as I can. So local plan policy SS14 relates specifically to the Terry's extension sites, and on this particular plot of land, it specifically says that any development should complement the existing views to the factory and clock tower. So my reading of that is that you can only approve this application if you think the development is a complement to the existing views of the factory building. Local plan policy DP3 says that new development should, where appropriate, address a number of overarching principles, including respecting and enhancing the historic character, delivering high quality design, appropriate density, creating locally distinctive places which relate well to the surrounding area and the historic character, and it should exploit opportunities for creating and enhancing existing key views. In particular, that under that policy, development should contribute to a sustainable, balanced community through provision of an appropriate range of housing, promoting opportunities for social and community interaction. And so I think it fails on a number of those. Local plan policy H2 is about density of residential development. And again, it talks about an appropriate mix of house types and being informed by the local character. You've already heard how many apartment blocks there are, not only on the Chocolate Works site, but actually on the opposite side of Bishopthorpe Road, all the way up. There's a whole bunch of apartment style developments up that side of the road as well. And what we need in South Bank is genuinely affordable family homes, preferably with some outside space. We don't need more flats. Policy D1 about placemaking is about developing poor existing urban and natural environments, but again talks about enhancing special qualities that better reveal the significance of the historic environment, and that specifically says development proposals that cause damage to the character and quality of an area will be refused. So again, I think that if you didn't think it was significant harm in the Grade 2 listed building, you've got an opportunity there to refuse it on that basis. And I think, going on within policy D3, it's clear that it says that development should respect and enhance views of landmark buildings again. Final one, policy D5, again, specific to listed buildings, talks again about preserving, enhancing and better revealing the elements which contribute to the significance of a building or its setting. And just to kind of summarise on all of those points, what I think I would make clear to committee is that, yes, the local plan is in draft form, but my understanding is that on a number of occasions in the last year or so, applications that have been refused using local plan policies have gone to appeal, and the inspector has upheld the decision of the planning committee, saying that the local plan, whilst it may still be in draft form, is a reflection of the will of the planning authority and therefore should carry weight and be respected.
Thank you. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you. It's a question about the affordable housing provision and the level of service charges and on that site as a whole. And I'm just asking, are you aware of whether there have been issues with service charges and affordability in the scheme as it's been built out to date?
Yeah, there's a number of issues actually. So I'm aware of residents who've contacted me who have bought under a discounted sale and have found that the management and service charges and actually the council tax banding have both caused problems for them and have actually made the upkeep of the property that they've bought unaffordable for them. But I think perhaps more worryingly is my understanding from speaking to our colleagues in the housing department is that a number of properties on the David Wilson home side, which were originally handed over to a housing association to be let as affordable housing, were actually ultimately handed back to the developer because as a result of the management charges, they were not affordable to anybody who was actually on the housing list waiting for that accommodation. And I think I would just make the point, because I think that I was listening to what the developer was saying about a negotiation between Joseph Rowntree and the developer. If the housing association is asked to swallow service charges and management fees, then they may not be passed on to the individual residents of those 18 affordable houses on the site, but they will limit the housing association's ability to deliver other affordable housing elsewhere within the city, because if they're spending money on subsidising service charges and management fees on the Terry's site, they're not using that money to provide affordable housing elsewhere.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that Councillor Kilbane has a further question, but I'm going to pick up with Councillor Eyre first. Councillor Eyre.
I was just researching there, thinking Councillor Kilbane will come first.
If you need a little longer, I'll ask Councillor Kilbane first.
I could cover it. You mentioned the uses within the master plan that had been lost. What I'd been looking into was, from what I could see, this was earmarked for 4-storey office accommodation. As you said, you pointed to have lost that. Would you have been happy if it was 4-storey office accommodation at 14-metre heights, as per the outline that was agreed in 2000?
So the argument that I would make is it's about the planning balance, isn't it? And it's about a public benefit. And if you were saying to me, would you like a 4-storey building in front of the factory building, then my first reaction would almost certainly be no, because I don't want to obscure the building. If what you're then saying to me is, well, actually that's going to deliver 2,500 jobs for the local community, then you might start to say, well, actually the harm that's caused to the factory building is outweighed by those significant number of jobs that are being earmarked. And it is worth pointing out that the outline application, that 2,500 number, was significantly expected to be on this side of the development overall. So it's not to say that is a 4-storey building either acceptable or unacceptable, because that's not how planning works. Planning is about the balance between the harm and the benefit. And what I'm arguing is that the harm that's being caused to the Grade 2 listed building by building 92 flats or 85 flats and 7 townhouses is the benefit, the public benefit doesn't outweigh that harm on that occasion. But if you were saying to me that you were going to deliver 2,500 jobs in a factory building, that's an entirely different proposition.
Thank you. Thanks. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. We heard from one of the speakers earlier on that this development, if this was approved, would bring approximately 1,900 new people into the area over the last few years, and the claim was that there are limited resources available to to service those people coming in. What's your experience been of the impact of the development on the local community?
So I guess it's had a number of impacts. We've had a significant problem with car parking in the area. So the development on the David Wilson side arbitrarily imposed a parking fee, and so a lot of people started to park their second cars on Camblesham Road and Bishopthorpe Road, and what that's led to is res park zones coming in, so the local residents are now having to pay for the privilege of parking as well. That hasn't gone down especially well. I think the more worrying concern is something that was touched on earlier about GP appointments, and it was noted, I think, already that the CCG has objected to this, which is incredibly unusual. Actually, your report, I think it's paragraph 5.53, says that there are two GP practices, just Cherry Street Surgery down in Clementhorpe and the Jorvik Medical Group practice up on Bishopthorpe Road. I have to tell members, the Cherry Street GP surgery has not been open since March. We actually held a public meeting in January because it's been so difficult to get any sort of GP appointment there over the last year. There hasn't been regular GP appointments available at Cherry Street. And actually Priory Medical Group in that public meeting who operate that surgery, they were very not forthcoming about their plans for the future use of that site, and we came away with a very distinct impression that they don't intend to provide GP appointments there anymore. But actually, in the course of that meeting, we did specifically ask them about the GP surgery that had been included in the outline plan for the Chocolate website, and they said something like that would be ideal. So I do note this 160,000 or so 106 money that's being proposed for developing surgery space, but Priory Medical Group certainly seem to be clear that they're not interested in Cherry Street, and I don't see that there's sufficient space on the site at Jorvik to be able to develop, to broaden that. And what you do get at the Jorvik practice is on a morning, certainly pre-lockdown, you would see a line of people waiting to get the cancellations and emergency appointments because the wait times for the Jorvik surgery were so long. And the number of people on that surgery's role is, I think, 2 or 3 times what it is in some of the other practices in the city. It's a very oversubscribed practice already.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Crawshaw. I'm sure you'll continue to watch with interest.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we did suggest a little while ago that when we came to the end of public speakers, we might then take the opportunity of an adjournment just as a comfort break. Are members still in agreement on that? I'm sure you will be. It's after 10 minutes to 7. Can I suggest we reconvene at 10 minutes past the hour? We'll take up again at 10 minutes past the hour. Thank you. Well, for those who've been with us through the course of this meeting, welcome back. For those who might be joining us, welcome. This is a meeting of the Planning Committee of the City of York Council. We're considering the application for the site south of the old Terriers factory, the residence. We've heard from a number of public speakers, and we now have the opportunity to, having done so, ask any further questions we might have of the planning officers and other officers of the council who are available to us at this meeting. Councillor Fenton and Councillor Eyre are both indicating they would like to do so. Councillor Fenton first.
Thank you, Chair. Just got a question for Guy. I think Guy Hanson is still with us. He was just picking up a point made by the applicant around their view that a development entirely made up of townhouses would be architecturally inappropriate. Would be grateful for Guy's observations on that, please.
Hello again. It's not a view that the council have fed back to the applicant. I can understand it in one sense, in that you have a tendency when presented with an existing context that's got a great big building next to it, and you think, oh well, I've got to make something similar, so I'll make a big building next to it because otherwise anything else looks a bit strange. But have to remember the purpose of the Terry's factory was to be deliberately a big building that looked like a big building compared to everything else. And given that it's a listed building as well, and that's part of its significance, the fact that it looks like a big building and it stands in long distant views and looks like a big building is something to preserve. There's a flip side to that, which is we sometimes get big buildings that people don't like, and people want to build big buildings next to them in order to hide detractors and things like that, which equally doesn't make sense to me, because two wrongs don't make a right. But in this instance, they also quoted the issues such as overlooking. But again, I don't really see that as being an issue, given the separation between this site and the factory building. And also, I think Councillor Pavlovic mentioned the fact that, well, there is a row of terraces, so why not another row of terraces? So I'm struggling to see that you wouldn't be able to make an attractive place with a terraced scheme.
That's right.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of questions just on the basis of one of the speakers. I was it was Mr. Calpin who made the argument about it no longer being previously developed land, that it was now public open space, and some photographs which seemed to show that some of that had since been dug away. I was wondering what if that was used as a ground for refusal, what restriction would there be on the landowner actually just stripping all that back down to the old foundation of the building, or would they have to leave it as public open space as it's being argued to be?
No restrictions. They could take it back. They don't need planning permission. They didn't need planning permission to do what they did. From the virtual site visit the other day, it was obvious that there's still quite a lot of rubble on the site. It's very uneven. There's still foundations there. There's still things there that relate to its previous use.
And the second question was again from that speaker, who said that the previous application had been refused at 4 stories and only passed at 3 stories. But what I seem to look at on the actual planning application that was approved was that site was 4 stories.
Yeah, there's been some confusion over that in terms of 3 and 4, and from what we can tell, there was both 3 and 4 stories approved.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. It's a kind of a supplementary to that, because it was a question I was going to ask specifically in relation to that speaker. He made mention of a 2006 application that was unanimously refused, and he gave the grounds for unanimous refusal. can you give us any details about what that scheme looked like? Because I could see nothing about it on the computer, on the planning portal, which hasn't migrated historic plans.
No, because of how old it is, being
Yeah.
2006, it won't have been scanned on an electric system. We can't get access to them at the minute. So I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that, unless anybody in the background, Eric or Gareth, knows the answer to that. I don't know that, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
If anyone does, please let us know. Councillor Fisher.
Councillor de Gorn.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to some comments that Councillor Crawshaw made, particularly concerning the original outline brief for the planning of the site, and the fact that certain facilities which were designed to make this more of a community, the whole Terry site is more of a community, were promised but have not been delivered. Now, is it reasonable to actually refuse this application on the grounds of what has not been provided on other parts of the site? Because my worry is that, you know, obviously, because it's been developed piecemeal, all these elements that were there promised in the outline have not been delivered so far. Is it reasonable to refuse this application on the grounds of what has not been provided on other parts of the site?
No.
Okay, that was a fairly short answer. Thank you. Councillor de Gorn, I'm not sure if it's a fresh question or whether you have some light to shed upon the history, given your long experience of these things.
Yes, it was actually. It was from my personal memory, the original design brief or development brief for the site was for mixed use development, and the overall design was to have the sort of office mixed use in a different sort of position. And I think that if from memory, the planning committee took the view that it made more sense for the community facilities and so on to be closer to the community, as in Campusham Road, rather than the actual development brief. So in a sense, I felt quite sorry for the developer because they'd followed the development brief, but the planning committee took a different view from our planners, which is why it was rejected, and then subsequent designs were changed in terms of the actual development brief for the site. So I don't know if that helps any, but that just gives a bit of context.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. Councillor Eyre.
There's a supplementary to Councillor Fisher's comment. It's something that concerned me earlier.
Okay.
With given this site is the one that's being, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the first time the CCG have ever requested a contribution, because it's something we've asked for at many meetings previously. Is there a danger that we can't enforce that on the basis that the site as a whole and the master plan should have delivered that, and we're expecting only the components, this particular component, to deliver in effect the GP capacity for this and the previous sites themselves?
We can only ask for what this development generates, and we're going to secure it through a legal agreement, not through a condition. So it's not about enforcing it. It's actually, we'd actually secure it through the legal, because it's money. That's how you do it, through the section 106. So it's not a condition to enforce. It will actually form part of the legal agreement.
I think my point was, could they challenge that? Say, well, actually, the demand of that GP capacity was caused by previous developments. Why are we paying for the whole expansion of one GP surgery when we're only contributing 10 to 20% of the rise in demand?
We'd have to have the discussion with them, but we can only ask for what this development will generate. So the X amount of people that will come from this site. So it is literally only looking for what's required from this site. It's unreasonable to start asking it for the rest of the site to be doing it. So it is literally just what will come from this site. Because I mean, it's not a vast amount of money in the grand scheme of things. So that's why it's come to where it's come from. I have got, Gareth just sent me through a copy of the 2006 refused plans. If you want to see, I mean, I can show you them, but I don't know that they're particularly useful in terms of being able to see a lot, but I can share them with you if you want.
That would be appreciated. Please do.
2 seconds. Right, can you see that now?
We can.
I know it's not. I'm going to try and see if I can make it a bit bigger and then. So there's the proposed east section site through residential court area there. Looks like it was quite big there in front, and those ones there. Just again, it's quite solid development in there. There you go. That's what I have. 2 seconds. So it was closer to the multi-story building. So you see how this is your size of your development here, where my cursor is. It's actually quite a lot closer to the multi-story building than what we're now looking at. Obviously, what we're looking at sits further back here. So that was part of the consideration, how close this building was to the multi-story compared to what you're now looking at, which is obviously further away. Okay.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, Gareth.
Are there any other questions? I don't see members indicating at the moment. And if that is the case, then we move into debate. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose refusal of this application on the grounds that I don't think it meets NPPF 193 and 194. I don't think the applicants put forward a clear and convincing justification that the harm that's accepted that will be done to the heritage asset is overcome by the public benefit. To be honest, I've heard very little in terms of public benefit from the development at all tonight. I also think it doesn't meet SS 14 of our draft local plan. I think this is overdevelopment, continued overdevelopment of the site, and I don't think the proposal in front of us in any way conserves or enhances the special characteristics of the conservation area. If anything, it detracts from them, and I don't think it in any way complements the existing views. So I think it fails to meet all of those tests.
Thank you for that. So I'm looking to see if anybody wants to second that proposal. I saw two hands almost exactly at the same time. I think you might just have edged it, Councillor Daubney. Would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I've got a few thoughts I've put together and listen obviously carefully to others' comments through the meeting. The former multi-storey factory is a Grade 2 listed building. We must remember that. The other remaining buildings from the Terry's era present both a clear architectural style and a reminder of York's key role in the development of the chocolate industry, both in the city and in the UK. I believe this amended application still presents shortcomings with regards to the view of the former multi-storey factory building from the southwest, which is an iconic listed building of York's industrial heritage and one of our city's key landmarks, and would have an adverse effect on the occupants and residents too. I believe the application for the 4 new buildings represents an overdevelopment of the site, since the emerging local plan sought only 56 units on the site, not 85 flats and 7 townhouses. This overdevelopment harms the setting of the Grade 2 listed building in both height and massing, causing substantial harm to the setting of that listed building. The former industrial building on the site was markedly lower than the proposed residential development before us. If approved, those open views across the site would be lost forever without a sufficient public benefit to outweigh the harm. Section 16 and 66 of the 1990 Act requires the local planning authority, when determining application of the effect listed building or its setting, to have special regard to the desirability of preserving the building or its setting. I believe that special regard has not been sufficiently weighted in this case, and the public benefit does not outweigh the harm caused, and I shall therefore be voting against.
Thank you. So it has been both proposed and seconded that this application is refused. I'm going to continue the debate and invite Councillor Fitzpatrick and then Councillor Pavlovic.
I agree entirely with the heritage arguments for this not proceeding. I think that's absolutely right, what Councillor Daubeny and Councillor Coombe have said. I'm particularly concerned about the effect on the local infrastructure. I think local ward councillor, Councillor Crawshaw, his points really hit home about CCG and the impact on the medical facilities in the area, both for the existing community and for the ones coming on board. Education, the early years provision, the lack of and closure of nurseries, as we know, and only having one nursery in the area. That's a real worry to me. So for those reasons, as well as the heritage reasons, I will not be supporting this application.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Chair, I certainly won't be supporting this. I would certainly concur with the points that have been made by the previous speakers, but I also want to just state that the questions to officers.
Councillor Pavlovic, I think we lost
one
you
of
just
which
for a moment.
was.
I think we lost you just for a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh yes, I've just got my internet connection is unstable. Am I with you now?
You are indeed. Would you mind starting again?
Yeah, thank you.
You said that you agreed with much of what had been said, but after that, if you could continue.
However, I do feel that this is an overdevelopment of this site. I don't feel that it meets the needs of the population of York as it stands. I was surprised to hear comments relating to, well, we can build apartments in the brownfield areas because we'll be building townhouses elsewhere. People want to have townhouses when they can also live in the city centre or close to the city centre. I found that comment difficult to accept, and I hope it wasn't meant in the way it came out. So my view is that this is from a dwelling, amassing the scale. It's a significant overdevelopment of this site, and the final thing I would like to say is, the local plan either means something or it doesn't. And 56 properties were what was considered appropriate for this site. We've heard from a guy saying that there is absolutely no reason why a development of 56 townhouses would be overawed, if you like, or overshadowed by the existing building, and I would support that. I accept that there's a need to build here, just not those apartments at that scale. So I will be supporting the proposal to refuse.
Thank you for that, Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Eyre, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's been an interesting discussion. I think there's been little disagreement that this is a previously developed site, and having physically been on the site before bits of it were dug up, it clearly is a previously developed site, and you can still see the evidence of that beneath your feet. I don't necessarily have a problem with the height. We heard that the buildings that were previously on the site were or some parts of them were of a similar height. So I don't have a problem in principle with with apartments, and I don't subscribe to the apartments bad, townhouses good. I think context is everything. It depends on the the setting that you're looking at. So I think we need to be careful not to condemn any application just because it happens to be apartments. We know there is a need for family homes as well as all types of dwellings. I think the area where I feel so most uncomfortable and really not assured is in relation to the density, both in terms of the comparison with the number in the local plan and also the units per hectare figure. It's probably a question I should have asked before the meeting in terms of how does that 71 units per hectare compare to what has been realised on the rest of the site. So it's really the density, twofold concerns: the density on this particular site, but also the cumulative impact, as some of the members have alluded to, and I went into this mindful of the need that to create housing, mindful of the fact that this development, if it were approved, would develop 18 affordable homes, which hopefully would be actually affordable if the assurances come to pass that we were given in terms of working with a registered provider to deliver truly affordable homes, and are mindful of not giving that up. But as I sit here, I'm genuinely torn because I feel as though my concerns around the density and the impact just haven't received assurance to the point that would give me comfort to support approval.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm equally not sold on the grounds for refusal. I think what I come back to is there's much talk about those open views towards the residence building. They were never there. They were never really there. It was a large industrial complex. The only reason those views exist is because that industrial complex was demolished to make way for 4-storey office accommodation. So there was a very short window. Anybody who moved into those residences at the time would have been aware that there was extant planning permission adjacent to them for 4-storey office blocks. And I think it isn't going to remain as an open view, and it isn't going to remain as open space. There was a very short window between demolition and whatever is put onto that site that allows it to be an open view and open space. And I think to get caught up in trying to preserve something that is in essence temporary is a misnomer. Something will go there. So the question then is, if we don't think this is the right thing, what does refusal, what do we intend to achieve in terms of public benefit from refusal? There is the possibility we go back to a 4-storey office block, which I think we would struggle to defend against an appeal, given it already has a previous planning application for that. Or we could take on board the argument that it's overdevelopment and try and scale that development back, perhaps to a 2- or 3-storey development or townhouses. But then that doesn't achieve anything that the members of this planning committee have kind of said. So they've said that the local infrastructure is struggling. One of the speakers said the local infrastructure is struggling. Scale that development back, you lose the £160,000 investment into the GP surgery. Scale that investment back, you lose the £400,000 investment into the schools, specifically £182,000 into early year provision that Councillor Crawshaw and Councillor Fitzpatrick said was desperately needed. Once you start rowing back on that, you lose all of that infrastructure investment. And, as we're told repeatedly, we're in a housing crisis, you lose houses. You scale back development, you lose houses. You will lose 30 to 40 family houses in the city. You will lose 18 affordable homes, which we desperately need. So I'm not convinced that scaling that back really delivers any greater public benefit than the scheme that we have here. Yes, in an ideal world, we would need to build at the density that we have there, but I think in terms of getting what's best for the public out of the site, I don't see the particular arguments at the moment against refusal do anything other than create less public benefit from any future development. So at the moment, I'm not minded to vote for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher, then Councillor de Gorne.
Thank you. This is an extremely difficult one. Clearly, the office development that was approved would have had a massive effect on the heritage site, but it would have had the effect of producing jobs. You know, that's the sort of what I say compensation for the harm to the heritage asset that we could have claimed on that. I'm not convinced by this development in terms of the apartments. I don't think that the design of them will add in any way, shape or form to the heritage asset that is already there. I mean, we discussed the hotel in Micklegate, and there was a lot of debate about whether that was suitable for the street scene and its effect on the Micklegate. This very much is of the same ilk to me. I don't feel that this particular design of the apartments, the bulk of them, will actually be anything other than a major detractor from the setting of this site. I think I went down there yesterday, had a look at the site informally. I looked at the residence, and it is beautifully architecturally designed. It's clean, it's beautiful materials. This just doesn't come up to standard next to it, in my view. And I fully appreciate that we want houses in York. I fully appreciate this is a previously developed site, but I really don't think that the design they've got for this is suitable for the site. I think I'm minded to vote against at the moment, unless somebody convinced me otherwise.
Councillor de Guan, then Councillor Cuthbertson, please.
I'm equally torn with this. In terms of the actual design, as has just been said, I think it is somewhat disappointing. I don't have an issue with the height, given the comparisons that we've had with the the ugly warehouse buildings that were there previously. And as someone who used to travel past there every day, I can certainly say the day when those came down, so you could see the residents, the headquarters building in its full glory, was fantastic. And as has been said, everyone accepted that something else was going to go there, but nevertheless, the site is screened, and any developer with any sense is going to want to retain that screening and that sort of soft edge to the green belt and the countryside. But in terms of the impact this has on the numbers, impact on the traffic impact, the impact on the need for places in surgeries and nurseries and all these other things, that I feel it is overdevelopment, given what we've heard about the projected density of what we expected to be able to get onto this site. Yes, we do need affordable housing, but we need to be convinced that the design is right for the location, and that the facilities, and accept for all the points about this being the last site, but it is the last opportunity that we might have got some of the Section 106 contributions from elsewhere to provide some community facilities somewhere within the site. So, I mean, obviously the ward councillors know more about the ins and outs, but at the moment I'm quite torn as to whether or not to support it, but certainly could see the arguments as to why we could be doing better things with this than what's proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I'm sort of very new to this, because I only saw the papers for the first time yesterday, and there's a lot of history in this, which I'm afraid has had some effect on the nature of the argument about accepting or not this application. First of all, the question about the quality of the materials that are going to be used. I don't see anything in the papers that says the materials will be substandard and will not compare remotely with the existing residence building. And despite the fact that I acknowledge what Councillor Fisher has commented on about the architectural integrity of that building, I don't notice a comment that says if we put something here, it will damage. It says that the amount of harm will be less than substantial. And I believe that if the planning officers had felt that the harm that was going to come of building so close to the existing residence, then they would have said so, and they would have recommended refusal. We are faced with considering the applications that's in front of us, not the one that we would like to have had. And I do think it's slightly sad that we can't get a longer term view as to how the planning authority and developers can actually work towards a development that might be seen as marginally more acceptable. But in terms of the structure itself, they are they have a lateral impact on the residents. They are not the longitudinal 3 barrack block rows that we saw in the previous application, and they are not as close to the residents of those. I can only say that I regret that we don't have an effective system for putting in a planning application and ensuring that the health authorities are not able to match that to what is and what isn't available. I speak of a similar situation in Wigginton, where I asked our local GP practice what would be the effect of the 740 houses that they were proposing under the local plan to build in Wigginton and Haxby. And they said, oh, well, we haven't put a business case yet. I said, well, you know, this could happen within the next 3 or 4 years. Don't you think it would be useful to start it? And I then went to talk to the CCG, and it was clear that the CCG was equally unprepared. I can only say that's disappointing when you're considering the health of a lot of people. And that's a valid point that's been expressed here. But at the same time, the application's been made. I'm not enamoured of the housing mix. I think that the suggestion that a social housing provider might levy a management of service charge that's not affordable on so-called affordable housing is utterly disgraceful. And I would hope that if we do get more arrangements like this proposed with a social housing provider, they actually get a sense of seeing what's real. In fact, as a friend of mine put it recently, they need to smell the coffee. So I was inclined to think, well, what's the public benefit of this? Well, the public benefit is not one in terms of extra retail or in terms of an extra surgery. It does, however, contribute to extra surgery facilities. It contributes to school facilities. It contributes to early years facilities. And I ought to declare an interest in that in the light of my executive membership. But this is a planning application, and I'm not affected by that in terms of the planning application. The things that come along with the Section 106 agreement are actually a benefit. And I rather suspect that if an application were to come up subsequently to this, if we refuse this and it were appealed, then that we would get a rather reduced Section 106 sum and rather less warmth in terms of the design. So on balance, I'm inclined to approve this design, not because I think it's got outstanding architectural merit, but just because I think that the larding of not very good, not good enough, should have been something else that we've heard this afternoon sits beside the point of the application that we've got to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The two members who wish to speak further, Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Fisher. Councillor Kilbane first, then Councillor Fisher.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just to go back to the original grounds for recommending refusal, and it might actually help answer some of the points that have been raised. It's accepted that this development will do harm to the heritage asset, and under NPPF 194, there has to be a clear and convincing justification for us to approve it. And again, I've not heard any clear and convincing justifications here today, other than the usual justifications that we get for development. And I've got to say, even within that, we're struggling to maintain our GP surgeries. GP surgeries practices are closing. The GPs are choosing to close practices in the ward, and it's hard to see where where they would be expanded. And also, you know, this is a Grade 2 listed building, so you know it's that means that any development here should really be exceptional. In terms of Councillor Ayres' arguments about the views and the permanency of the views, nobody's really arguing about the permanency of the views. I think some people would like it to be permanent parkland, but I don't think that's that would be a hell of a fight they'd have on their hands to try and achieve that. So if we're accepting that some development is going to happen here, what that development's got to do, according to our own policy SS14 and the local plan, is it should complement the existing views of the factory and the clock. I mean, quite specifically, that's what it refers to on this particular piece of land. I've heard no arguments that I don't think the applicant has at all shown how this particular development complements the views to the factory and the clock. I mean, I think if you look at the plans, they're really bog standard flats. You know, they're more of a detractor. Also, that the development should enhance the special character and appearance of the conservation area. Well, again, outside of the commitment that Councillor Cuthbertson's referred to, that they're going to use some decent materials for the building, which you kind of hope they would anyway. There's nothing in the design of these buildings which in any way enhances the special character or appearance of the conservation area. They are really bog standard. It's a really bog standard development, and the point of refusal is to say, if you're going to build on this site, great, but you've got to do a lot better. You've got to have an exceptional development on this site if you're going to meet those bars of, you know, clear and convincing justifications, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher, then Councillor Pavlovic, and finally Councillor Ayre.
Thank you. To just reply to something Councillor Cuthbertson said, I fully appreciate that our officers have expressed the view that this constitutes less than significant harm to the heritage asset. But on anything to do with planning and design, there is an aesthetic element, and aesthetics are very subjective. And members have a perfect right to take a different view to that of officers. I fully appreciate that Guy Hanson is an expert architect, and you know the planning officers have got experience in this, but some of us have long histories of, you know, sitting on planning committees, and we feel sometimes that we take a different view from officers, and we're entitled to do that.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just clarify that a scaled back development that was more in keeping with the local plan numbers would still generate affordable housing. It would still generate a fee to potentially to the CCG, to early years, and if I'm wrong on that, and you know, Councillor Ayre stated we would get no 18 houses, we would get no sum to the CCG. There would be, it may not be the figure that's currently identified, but unless somebody can tell me that 56 homes no longer generates affordable housing, then I'm not sure that that's an argument that I could accept.
Councillor Ayre.
Perfect timing, Councillor Pavlovic. I did a quick calculation. If you apply the 20%, you drop from 18 down to nearer 10. That's assuming you can maintain the 20%. What the developer will argue, as it's on a site-by-site basis, is that reducing that from 92 to 56 significantly impacts the profitability of the site, therefore will not allow them to deliver 20%, and you'll end up with nearer 10 to 15%. So you may only end up with 5 or 6. I would probably argue, I take fully on board Councillor Kilbane's point about preferring an exceptional scheme. I suspect if you came back with 56, it still wouldn't be exceptional. People would still say there is limited harm to the heritage asset, and you've got half as many houses, half as many affordable, half as many contributions. So the public benefit definitely is considerably less. So you again would not approve that one. So you'd end up probably going down to meet the exceptional criteria that we said that maintains the heritage asset of probably 15 houses of around about £650,000 a piece as the only way to not cause any harm to that particular asset. Once you get to 56, you're going to get harm and you've got half the benefit. 92, you've got probably a little bit more harm by an extra floor, but twice the level of benefit. So there is a scalable aspect to that, and that's what you've got to weigh up.
Councillor Kilbane, I'm keen that we don't take too long before we move towards a vote and make some,
Sure, Chair. Just say this.
By all means, just respond if you want to do
very
that.
quickly. There's just a lot of speculation in that, a lot of pie in the sky in that, really, Councillor Eyre, and I would stress it's not really our job to do the developers' calculations for them.
Significant amount of planning experience, Councillor Kilbane.
Okay, well, it has been both proposed and seconded that this should be refused. Various grounds have been mentioned for that. I think that initially Councillor Kilbane was very specific as he referred to NPPF 193, 194 in particular, particularly with relating to scale and massing on this proposed development. But there have been many other grounds referred to during the course of the conversation and our debate. So it would be especially helpful before we put this to a vote that we get some support from Becky, and if necessary, just some legal input, just to clarify what it is that we would be voting on, and specifically if we were to vote for refusal, if that was supported by committee, on what grounds we are doing so. Can you help us with that, please?
Of course, no problem. So I've got I've had to think, obviously, I've had to think about what you've said and the advice around that. And you like, as Councillor Fisher said, you're entirely right. You can overturn the officer's recommendation. What I've got is that there is issues with the height and massing of the proposed development. You don't feel that the quality is sufficient in terms of the design of it, and all that, when weighed up in the balance of is an impact to the heritage asset, and there isn't sufficient public benefit to outweigh the harm that you've identified as the proposal, and that would then turn to be your reason for refusal. I'd have to, and obviously you'd include your SS14 and MPPF in that as well. What I would suggest that I would do is actually draft the reason for refusal. Councillor Cuthbert, I thought Councillor Cuthbert was signalling, but he was just putting his report in the way. It's okay. What I could do is draft the reason for refusal and delegate that to chair and deputy chair, if that's okay. If you're happy with those, obviously it's the scale and massing of the development, its impact, and the impact on the heritage assets, and the harm's not outweighed by the public benefit.
Okay, I'm very keen. I give opportunity to both Councillor de Gorne and Councillor Eyre just to contribute at this point. Councillor Eyre first, and then Councillor de Gorne.
Yes, we've had this discussion previously, and legal advice is that you're voting on the motion to refuse, therefore you can't approve it afterwards because we then haven't voted on it. So I take a legal view that you can't vote to refuse based on criteria that are yet to be decided. You actually need the specific recommendation for the committee to vote on.
So the recommendation is definitely for refusal, and it's on those grounds. It's just a specific wording that I'd then bring to Councillor Colwick and Councillor Pavlovic. Heidi, are you there? Can you help?
Hello, yeah, you would need to put the specific reasons, but I would be happy if those reasons are quite clear, that Becky would be able to put that wording through to the chair and vice chair, because the principle's established, as long as those grounds are clear. I know, just on the point of reason for refusal, I know that lots of other people mentioned things when they came through with comments. However, the motion that was seconded was just those two reasons. So if those other things have to be brought in, then there'd have to be an amendment to the motion. So the motion, as I see it, is on those two grounds that Becky has mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, that's helpful. In that case, Becky, could you repeat that so that we're
Yep, no problem.
without any doubt?
Yep, so it was the size and scale of the building in relation to you felt, hang on, let me just, rereading this so I'm absolutely clear for you guys, that it was the size and the scale of the building wasn't acceptable, and it would result in harm to the heritage asset that wasn't outweighed by the public benefit to the proposals.
Okay. And Heidi, do you feel that is sufficient clarity for us to make a vote?
Chair.
Yes.
Heidi, I specifically heard Councillor Kilbane, when he was making his motion to refuse, also included the overdevelopment
Okay,
of the
sorry.
site.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And
I can add that.
I made note, so I've got MPPF 193 and 194, which is the harm to the heritage asset is not overcome by public benefit, and also local
Heidi,
plan.
we've lost your sound. We lost you then.
Sorry. Yeah, so 193 and 194, which is harm to the heritage asset, is not overcome by public benefits. And then I've got the draft local plan policy SS14 in relation to overdevelopment, and it does not enhance, and therefore it does not enhance and preserve the conservation area. That's what I noted down. Does that match? So Becky, do you want to, sorry, we've got to be absolutely clear. Becky, would you mind repeating again? So everybody's clear what we're voting on. Thank you.
Before you do, Becky, Councillor Kilbane, you.
Yes, that's right. That's what Heidi, but also in SS14 that it in no way complements the existing views.
We can formulate that as part of the 2 reasons for refusal.
Okay, but we're making specific reference to MPPF 193, 194, and SS14.
Yep, got that. Yep.
Okay.
Just the other, can I add? There was reference specifically to the local plan density for the site and the housing mix in terms of our identified housing need. I don't know whether those are relevant to as
I think
the
2 reasons for refusal that we've just given you, we could reasonably defend.
Okay.
I think if you go down any other route, we might then have issues with that, and that's just I mean it's entirely up to you. You can go down that route if you want, but my
I'm just
advice
putting those out there because there are other things that people have made.
My advice would
comments
be
people have made.
to stick to your reasons, 2 reasons for refusal that you've very clearly just given us in relation to the MPPF and the harm and the overdevelopment of the site. I would suggest to stick to that.
That's very
entirely
helpful.
up to you if you want to change.
I get a sense from committee and the nods that I see that we're content with the motion as you have summarised it, Becky. And just to check with Councillor Kilbane, who proposed it, and with Councillor Daubney, who seconded, you're content that what you have proposed and seconded has been reflected in that. Exactly. Thank you. So before I ask the officer who's going to conduct the named vote to do so, let me just be sure that all members of the committee have actually heard all of the debate. Councillor, I can see your hand is still up. Is that just from before, or do I? Okay.
Sorry to be up.
Go on.
Councillor Kilbane specifically made reference to the draft local plan. I would take a legal view because I think that would be a very, very weak grounds for refusing and would open us up to check. So I want to double check before we vote that is included, that reference to SS14, the draft local plan, is included, because that will be open to appeal on the use of the draft local plan.
It would be in conjunction with the MPPF. So you'd have the MPPF as well as the local plan. So you'd have that. But Heidi, if you can come in.
I think it has to be a combination of the both. And that's certainly how I listed it, almost like you've got 2 reasons, and within those there were kind of sub reasons, if you like, that make up the reason, but it would be together because there's obviously a statutory test that's done in relation to heritage assets, and then there's the policy in the MPPF, and there's slightly different tests of having regard to and preserving and enhancing, and so it would be the 2 together that make up the reason.
Thank you. That's a very helpful clarification. So just as I was about to just check that all members have heard the the conversation, the debate, the contributions from beginning to end? Can you just indicate by raising a hand? Thank you very much. I don't think we need to repeat the motion, but yes, it would probably helpful before we go to the name vote, Becky, if you just again repeat exactly what it is that we're voting on. I know it's tiresome, but so that we're clear.
No, it's fine. Don't worry. I'm just give me 2 seconds. So it's refusing it on overdevelopment of the site due to the height and massing of the proposed development, and also failing to respect the character and setting of the former factory building, and the fact that it would cause harm to the conservation area contrary to local and national planning policy.
Thank you very much. Okay. So if the Democratic officer would please conduct a name vote.
Yeah, so this is a vote on refusal of the application. I'm going to go through alphabetically with the chair voting last. So if you could let me know whether you're for or against refusal, please. So Councillor Eyre.
On the grounds of the last 15 minutes, and I wouldn't want to send an officer to defend what we've just discussed, I will vote against refusal.
Okay, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Sorry, I've got exactly the same view as Councillor Eyre. I want to vote against refusal.
Okay, Councillor de Gorne.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Daubney.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
For.
Councillor Fenton.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fitzpatrick.
For.
Councillor Hollier.
Against.
Councillor Kilbane.
No speeches, just for.
Councillor Pavlovic.
For.
Councillor Perrott.
For.
And Councillor Cullick.
Against.
The application's refused.
Thank you, members. We come to the end of that item. There are no items of urgent business, therefore we come to the end of this meeting. Can I thank all members for their attendance and contributions this evening, and again thank the members of the public who've been joining us, either just to participate in watching this, or of course particularly those who have contributed as public speakers. Thank you everybody, and the officers, behind the scenes who make all this happen. We do appreciate it. Thank you. The meeting is closed.